Hello, my friend. Tonight we're stepping quietly into the year 850, into a Viking household where morning does not begin with an alarm, a cup of coffee, or the suspicious glow of a phone held 3 inches from your face. It begins in darkness. For a few moments, you simply listen. The fire has almost died, somewhere nearby. Someone shifts beneath a wool covering. A child breathes softly. Timber creaks as the building settles against the cool northern air. Beyond the walls, an animal makes a low, impatient sound, already reminding you that sleeping late is not really part of the arrangement. Before we rise with you, you can settle comfortably where you are, and if these slow journeys into ordinary history help you relax, you're warmly invited to subscribe. You can also leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. There is something rather pleasant about imagining people falling asleep together across different countries while you wake in a Viking longhouse more than 1,000 years ago. Your eyes begin adjusting to the darkness. There is no single universal Viking home. Of course, the Scandinavian world stretches across varied landscapes, and houses differ according to region, wealth, materials, and local tradition. Archaeologists uncover buildings of different sizes and arrangements. Still, if you live on a reasonably established farmstead, your home is likely built around a timber framework, with walls constructed from materials available nearby. Turf, wood, clay, stone, and woven branches may all play their part. The house is not silent. It almost never is. Someone coughs. Wood ticks faintly near the hearth. Wind presses against the roof. Depending on the household and the design of the building, animals may be sheltered close to human living spaces or in connected areas. Their presence bringing warmth, noise, smell, and the occasional reminder that medieval ideas about personal space are refreshingly uncomplicated. You remain beneath your covering for another moment. Your bedding is not luxurious by modern standards. Although describing every Viking woman as sleeping miserably on a pile of straw would be equally misleading. Wealth matters, household status matters. Archaeology gives us traces of beds, benches, textiles, feathers, straw, skins, and other materials, but the exact arrangement varies enormously. If your household has resources, your sleeping place may be more comfortable than the popular image suggests. Comfortable, however, is relative. There is no thermostat, no central heating, no cheerful little button that turns winter into 22 degrees Celsius. The hearth is your climate control system. Cooking range, light source, social centre, and persistent source of smoke. During the night, the fire's been allowed to decline, fuel is valuable, and maintaining a roaring blaze until sunrise would consume wood unnecessarily. So the temperature has fallen. You feel it first around your face, then your fingers. Eventually your feet provide a formal complaint. You sit up. Your clothing depends on your circumstances, region, season, and status, and scholars continue debating details of Viking Age dress because textiles rarely survive perfectly. What does survive can be wonderfully informative. Graves, metal fittings, textile fragments, images, tools, and later written descriptions allow researchers to reconstruct possibilities, but not a single Viking wardrobe worn identically from Norway to Denmark to Sweden. You are not wearing a horned helmet. This is already a productive morning. Your clothing is practical, layered when necessary, and made from materials such as wool and linen. Garments represent astonishing amounts of human labour. Every piece of cloth around you begins somewhere with plants or animals, then passes through preparation, spinning, weaving, cutting, and sewing. Nothing arrives overnight in a cardboard box. This means you notice clothing differently. A torn seam is not a reason to replace a garment. It is a reason to repair it. A worn piece may be patched. A badly damaged garment may eventually surrender useful pieces of cloth for another purpose. Textile is wealth measured in hours. Around you, the household begins waking. Perhaps your husband is present. Perhaps he's travelling. Perhaps you're widowed. Perhaps you're unmarried and living within a larger family household. There is no single Viking woman whose day represents everyone. Your legal and social position can also differ significantly. Free women possess rights that surprise people accustomed to imagining the Viking Age as one enormous drinking hall populated entirely by bearded men. In some Scandinavian legal traditions known from later sources, women could hold property and had recognized positions within marriage and inheritance. But caution is important. Much of the detailed written legal evidence survives from centuries after the year 850. Historians therefore resist casually projecting every later rule backward. The broad picture is useful, but the fine print remains blurry, and beneath free society exists a much harsher reality. Slavery is part of the Viking world. An enslaved woman waking in this household experiences the same cold dawn under profoundly different circumstances. Her labour, freedom of movement, family security, and control over her future may be severely restricted. So even before breakfast, status has already shaped the day. You swing your feet down. The floor beneath you may be packed earth, or another prepared surface depending on the building. The interior is dim enough that shapes emerge slowly. Light enters reluctantly through openings in the doorway. Artificial illumination exists, but fuel is not something you waste merely because darkness feels inconvenient. The hearth offers a faint reddish glow. That matters. If embers have survived beneath the ash, you can revive the fire much more easily. Losing it completely means more effort, and effort is the invisible currency governing almost everything you do. You move toward the hearth. Around you are objects that would seem ordinary to your neighbours, but precious to archaeologists more than 1,000 years later. Wooden vessels, ceramic containers in some regions, iron implements, loom equipment, chests, baskets, tools repaired repeatedly because metal is valuable and craftsmanship matters. The household itself is more than a family home. It is a workplace, a warehouse, a kitchen, a textile workshop, a social centre, sometimes a place of trade and hospitality. The modern division between going to work and being at home would make little sense here. You wake inside the machinery of your own economy. Much of that machinery depends upon labour that later stories barely mention. Your labour. This is one reason the popular image of Viking life can be misleading. Ships and raids leave dramatic stories. Swords survive impressively in museums. A spindle whirl does not look nearly as theatrical behind glass. Yet without spindle whirls, looms, food preparation, livestock management, storage, maintenance, and countless repetitive domestic tasks. Those famous ships cannot remain supplied for long. Someone has to make the sail. Someone has to produce clothing. Someone has to keep the farm functioning while travellers are away. Heroic poetry rarely pauses to celebrate the person who remembered that the milk needed attention before sunrise. History, fortunately, can. You crouch beside the hearth. A thin thread of smoke curls upward as you disturb the ash. Smoke management inside Viking houses remains an interesting subject because buildings vary. Reconstruction experiments produce different results, and roof openings, ventilation, hearth placement, weather, and fuel all affect conditions. Whatever the exact arrangement, fire leaves evidence. Soot, heat, smell. Your hair and clothing absorb it. You probably do not think of yourself as smelling smoky. Everyone around you shares much of the same environment. To a visitor from the modern world, however, the scent would be immediate wood smoke, wool, earth, stored food, people, perhaps animals, and the cool dampness of morning. Not unpleasant in every respect, just unmistakably alive. Behind you, another person begins moving. Soon the children will be awake. Soon the animals will demand attention. Soon grain may need grinding, water carrying, food preparing, fibres working, clothing repairing, and dozens of small decisions making. But not yet, for this quiet moment. The household balances between sleep and work. You bend closer to the ashes. There, a tiny orange point survives. Yesterday's fire has waited through the darkness. You reach for dry material and begin coaxing the ember brighter, because before anyone receives breakfast, before the room becomes warm, and before the household properly wakes, someone must persuade fire to return. And this morning, that someone is you. The ember brightens beneath your careful attention. You do not rush it. A fire that has survived the night as a few glowing fragments needs patience rather than enthusiasm. Dry tinder comes first, then small pieces of fuel, then larger wood once the flame has enough strength to take them. Blow too hard and ash lifts into your face. Add heavy fuel too soon and you may smother the whole thing. So you crouch there, breathing gently. A faint flame appears, then another. The familiar crackle begins, and with it comes the first small victory of your working day. Fire is so ordinary that nobody around you is likely to applaud. This is unfortunate, because without it the morning becomes considerably less cooperative. The hearth provides heat and light, but its most important daily role is cooking. It also helps with drying, craft work, and other household tasks. In colder weather, its warmth becomes even more precious. Smoke rises as the flames strengthen. Depending on the house, smoke may escape gradually through openings in the roof and structure rather than through anything resembling a modern chimney. Reconstructed Viking buildings have helped archaeologists explore how such interiors behave. Although there is no single arrangement that explains every house, some reconstructions become surprisingly smoky under certain conditions. Others draw better than expected. You would probably find this scholarly debate rather amusing. You're simply trying to make breakfast. The household is waking properly now. A child murmurs somewhere behind you. Someone steps across the dim interior. A wooden vessel is moved. Perhaps an older relative begins helping with another task, because work inside a substantial farm household is rarely performed by one heroic woman racing between everything at once. That familiar modern image of the Viking wife single-handedly cooking, weaving, farming, raising 7 children, making cheese, managing livestock, and presumably finding time before lunch to stare dramatically toward the fjord is rather too tidy. Households can contain extended family members, servants, dependents, foster children, labourers, and, in wealthier circumstances, enslaved people. Who performs which task depends greatly on status. If you are the senior free woman of a prosperous household, management may be as important as direct labour. You decide what supplies can be used, what must be saved, and what work needs immediate attention. In a poorer household, there are fewer hands to command, which means your own hands become considerably busier. Either way, breakfast does not magically materialize. You inspect what is available. The Viking diet is far more varied than the endless roasted meat sometimes shown in popular fiction. Meat certainly matters, but livestock is valuable, and slaughter is often seasonal or practical, rather than a daily excuse for a feast, depending on location and season. People consume combinations of grain, dairy products, fish, meat, vegetables, legumes, wild plants, berries, nuts, and preserved foods. Your morning meal may therefore be simple. Perhaps there is porridge, perhaps bread from an earlier baking, perhaps some dairy food accompanies it. Exactly how Viking Age meals are structured throughout the day remains difficult to reconstruct in every region. Later written sources cannot simply be treated as perfect descriptions of life in the mid-9th century, and archaeological remains tell us ingredients more easily than they tell us whether someone considered a particular bowl of food breakfast. Still, people wake hungry, and physical labour requires energy. You reach for grain. Barley, rye, and oats are important crops across parts of Scandinavia. While cultivation patterns differ with climate and region, wheat exists too, though it can carry greater status in some contexts. What lands in your cooking vessel depends upon where you live and what your farm has successfully produced. That final word matters, successfully. There is no supermarket waiting beyond the longhouse. A poor harvest is not an inconvenience expressed by slightly higher prices on a shelf. It can become a household crisis. Every handful of stored grain represents land cleared, soil worked, seed planted, weeds fought, crops harvested, grain processed, and storage protected from moisture and pests. You do not casually spill it. Water must also be fetched or kept ready, depending on your farmstead. It may come from a spring, stream, well, or another reliable source. Carrying water is one of those repetitive tasks history often makes invisible, because nobody writes heroic verses about buckets. Try running a household without water, however, and its importance becomes obvious very quickly. You combine grain and liquid for a warm preparation. The vessel itself deserves attention. Cooking pots found archaeologically vary by region and period. Soapstone vessels are particularly associated with parts of Norway, while pottery traditions differ elsewhere. Iron cauldrons exist, but iron is expensive. Your kitchen equipment is not a matching set. Nothing says Scandinavian domestic sophistication quite like owning 3 useful containers that have survived years of being dropped near a fire. The mixture begins warming. You stir. This sounds peaceful. For approximately 12 seconds. It is. Then someone needs something. A younger child may require attention. Another person wants food. Fuel needs adjusting. A vessel must be found. Something stored from yesterday needs checking. The morning unfolds not as one task after another, but as several tasks overlapping. That is probably one of the most recognizable parts of your life. You rarely do only one thing. While food cooks, you inspect the fire. While watching the fire, you listen to the children. While listening to the children, you mentally calculate whether there is enough flour prepared, and somewhere beyond the wall, livestock is becoming increasingly convinced that you have forgotten its existence. You have not. The animals can wait a little longer. Humans eat first in some circumstances, animals first in others, and practical routines shift according to season, weather, household organization, and immediate necessity. There is no surviving Viking timetable announcing that goats must be attended at precisely 7:15. The sun is your clock, so are hunger, temperature, daylight, and the increasingly expressive noises coming from outside. You portion the food. Bowls and spoons may be wooden, horn, ceramic, or made from other available materials. Wood is so common in daily life that its archaeological survival can distort our impression of Viking material culture. Metal survives beautifully. Wood often disappears unless conditions preserve it. The past loses ordinary things first. That is worth remembering as you lift a wooden spoon. Your breakfast is unlikely to overwhelm a modern restaurant critic. It is warm, filling, and practical. Those are excellent qualities when your day involves hours of physical work. Perhaps you add something richer if the household has it. Milk, cultured dairy, butter, maybe a little preserved fruit. Honey can provide sweetness, although pouring it over breakfast with modern generosity would be extravagant. Honey requires work and availability. Sweetness is valuable. Salt is valuable too. Almost everything you consume carries a history of labor. Even dairy food is not simply waiting in a convenient bottle. Someone milks the animal, someone handles the milk, someone turns part of it into products that last longer. Butter and cheese are not merely pleasant additions to the table. They help transform a perishable resource into something useful and storable. You eat while the fire warms the space. Conversation may be practical. Weather, work, animals, a visitor expected later, perhaps news from another farm. The Viking world is social, and farms are not isolated bubbles, even when distances between settlements can be significant. Families are tied through marriage, obligation, exchange, assemblies, travel, and reputation. Yet the morning conversation cannot continue indefinitely. Your bowl empties, others finish theirs. Now comes another detail modern depictions often skip: cleaning. There are vessels to scrape, rinse, wipe, or otherwise prepare for reuse. Food cannot simply be left everywhere. Waste has value too. Scraps may feed animals. Ash from the hearth has practical uses. Bones, worn materials, and broken objects can sometimes be repurposed. A household accustomed to producing almost everything does not share the modern talent for throwing useful material away. You preserve what can be preserved, reuse what can be reused, repair what can be repaired. Then you inspect the hearth again. The flames are steady now. You add enough fuel to keep them useful without wasting wood. Gathering and preparing fuel requires labour, and in some landscapes good timber is more available than in others. Dried peat or other fuels can also matter regionally. Nothing about the fire is free, not even warmth. Then the sound comes again from beyond the household space. A cow, long, low, unmistakably impatient. You pause with the spoon still in your hand. Another animal answers. The morning has advanced, and the livestock has apparently formed a committee. You put the vessel aside, adjust your clothing against the outdoor air, and move toward the doorway. Behind you, the revived hearth burns steadily. Ahead waits the farmyard, and unlike the fire, the animals are perfectly capable of complaining when breakfast is late. The doorway opens, and the morning air reaches you immediately. It feels sharper after the smoky warmth of the longhouse. Moisture hangs over the ground, depending on where in Scandinavia you live and what season has found you. There may be frost beneath your feet, summer dew on the grass, autumn mud around the buildings, or snow packed against walls and fences. Today, imagine a cool working morning, the sort that makes you pull wool a little closer around your body before stepping fully outside. Behind you comes the smell of smoke and breakfast. Ahead comes the smell of animals. Quite a lot of animals. The romantic Viking farmstead looks charming from a distance. Timber buildings beneath a pale northern sky. Green fields stretching toward woodland, perhaps mountains or water beyond them, stand in the middle of it, however. And the atmosphere becomes considerably more agricultural. Mud, dung, wet wool, hay, smoke, leather, earth. Nothing has been deodorized for your convenience. You move toward the livestock. Cattle are particularly important. They provide several resources at once: milk, meat, hides, horn, bone, and eventually labour or wealth in forms that can be exchanged or displayed. Oxen may provide pulling power. The number and quality of animals associated with a household can help reveal prosperity, but owning livestock means feeding livestock. And livestock possesses the unreasonable habit of requiring care every day. Your cow does not recognize Sundays. She has never heard of holidays. She's unmoved by the possibility that you slept badly. If she needs milking, she needs milking. You approach carefully. Cattle of the Viking Age are not identical to many large modern dairy breeds selectively developed over centuries for extraordinary milk production. Archaeological animal bones help researchers reconstruct size and husbandry, while surviving traditional breeds sometimes offer useful comparisons, though no modern animal should simply be treated as a perfect Viking survivor. The cow shifts as you settle beside her. You place a vessel beneath. Then your hands begin the familiar rhythm. Warm milk strikes the container. A soft sound. Again, again, again. This is skilled work disguised as repetition. Milk too roughly and the animal may object. Approach badly and she may move away. A nervous cow can transform a peaceful historical reconstruction into something involving mud, shouting, and a bucket travelling sideways. You know the animal. That matters. Animals are not anonymous production units. You recognize their temperaments, injuries, habits, and condition. You notice when one eats poorly. You notice when another limps. Your household depends too heavily upon them for neglect to remain unnoticed for long. Once collected, milk becomes part of another chain of labour. Fresh milk spoils relatively quickly, so processing is essential. Some can be consumed fresh, but much may become soured milk, butter, cheese, or other preserved dairy products. Archaeologists and food historians reconstruct these practices from vessels, residues, later traditions, environmental evidence and comparison, but exact recipes are elusive. Your cheese does not come with instructions. Fortunately, you do not need them. Knowledge lives in practice. You learn by watching older people. You repeat movements. You make mistakes. Someone corrects you. Eventually your hands remember what your mind no longer needs to explain. Nearby, sheep require attention. Sheep are extraordinarily valuable because they transform grass and stored fodder into food and fibre. Their wool will eventually become thread, and thread will become cloth, and cloth will consume so many hours of your life that you might reasonably suspect sheep invented textile production as revenge. Not every sheep produces identical wool. Coat qualities differ, and Viking Age sheep may have characteristics resembling some northern European land races more than modern commercial breeds. Wool can be sorted according to quality and intended use, but that comes later. For now, you check the animals. Are they healthy? Has one escaped? Is a fence damaged? Are young animals safe? Depending on season, livestock may graze farther from the farmstead. In some Scandinavian communities, seasonal movement to outlying pastures becomes important, with people spending periods at summer farms or grazing grounds. Such patterns vary by region and are not something every household practices identically. Your world is local. The broad term Viking Age covers too much territory to provide one universal routine. A woman living on a Danish farm does not experience precisely the same environment as one living beside a Norwegian fjord or in central Sweden. Even neighbours can have different resources. One farm has better grazing, another has woodland, another sits closer to fishing grounds, another enjoys fertile soil. Daily life grows from landscape. You scatter feed for poultry if your household keeps chickens or other domestic birds. Chickens are present in Viking Age Scandinavia, though their importance varies. Their eggs provide useful food, but you should not imagine enormous modern eggs arriving with industrial regularity. You search carefully. An egg is an egg. Finding one feels worthwhile. You collect it and place it somewhere safe. This is not the moment to demonstrate how easily breakfast can become floor decoration. Goats may also form part of the farm economy, particularly where terrain suits them. They provide milk, meat, hides, and horn, and they are excellent at eating vegetation that other livestock may ignore. They are also excellent at escaping. Some historical experiences require no archaeological debate whatsoever. A goat sees a fence and interprets it as a personal challenge. You inspect the enclosure. One section looks suspicious. You push it back into place. Maintenance never really ends. Fences, roofs, tools, containers, clothing, and buildings all deteriorate. Your world is constantly being repaired. You might wonder whether women perform every animal-related task themselves. They do not. Labour divisions exist, but they are flexible rather than perfectly fixed. Age, status, household size, season, and necessity all matter. Men participate in agricultural work. Children help. Servants and enslaved people may perform exhausting portions of routine labour. Older family members contribute according to ability. Some tasks become strongly associated with women in later Scandinavian traditions or historical interpretation, particularly dairy work and textile production. But reconstructing precise divisions in the year 850 requires caution. Dead people leave tools. They rarely leave schedules. Grave goods once encouraged archaeologists to assign simple gender categories to objects. Weapons meant male. Textile tools meant female. Modern research has made the picture more careful. Biological sex, social gender, burial symbolism, occupation, and grave ritual do not always align neatly enough for every object to become an unquestionable job description. Still, the repeated association between women and textile equipment is significant. Domestic production is not merely decorative work. It is economic work. The animals around you are connected directly to it. You run your hand through the wool of a sheep. Eventually this fleece will be removed, cleaned, sorted, perhaps combed, then spun. Hours upon hours are already hiding inside that coat. You continue around the farmyard. There may be pigs as well. Pigs can forage effectively. particularly where woodland allows access to nuts and other foods. They provide meat and fat, both valuable. Dogs may move around the settlement too, helping with guarding, herding, hunting, companionship, or simply supervising human activity with the confidence of creatures convinced they own the farm. Cats are also known in the Viking world. Their fur appears to have been used in some contexts, which may slightly reduce the cosy image of the Viking household cat sleeping beside the fire. History does occasionally ruin a perfectly nice moment. You check water. You check feed. You examine an animal that seemed restless yesterday. Then you begin dealing with the inevitable accumulation beneath their feet. Manure is unpleasant, but useful. It can fertilize fields and gardens, returning nutrients to the soil. Farming requires understanding cycles even without modern chemistry. You may not speak of nitrogen, but generations of observation teach people what makes land productive. Nothing useful is casually wasted. The farmstead forms a system. Fields feed animals. Animals provide milk, meat, hides, wool, labour, and manure. Manure supports crops. Crops feed people. People maintain fields and animals. Break too many links and the household suffers. That is why your morning inspection matters. Not because anyone will sing about it. Not because a saga hero will boast that his mother once repaired an excellent goat enclosure. It matters because survival is mostly made from ordinary competence repeated until it becomes invisible. By now, daylight has strengthened. The farmstead is fully awake. Other figures move between buildings. Someone carries a bundle. A child is given a small task. An animal calls from farther away. Smoke rises from the roof of the house you left behind. Your hands smell faintly of livestock and milk. There will be time to clean them. There will not be much time to rest. You carry the fresh milk toward the house, but your eyes pass over the stored grain waiting for attention. Animals have been fed. Now the household needs food for later, and before grain becomes bread or porridge, it must pass through another stubborn piece of your morning, one that requires stone, muscle, patience, and a surprisingly large portion of human history. You reach for the grain. The grinding is waiting. You bring the grain closer to where it can be worked. It looks harmless enough. Small dry kernels gathered together in a container. Nothing about them announces the amount of effort still separating them from a piece of bread. Yet this is one of the quiet tricks of pre-modern life. Food often appears simple only after someone has spent hours making it so. You take what you need, not too much. Stored grain is security. It has to survive until the next harvest. And depending on season, that harvest may still feel painfully distant. Dampness, insects, rodents, poor storage, theft, and simple miscalculation can all reduce supplies. You therefore develop an instinct for quantities. How much grain remains? How many people must eat from it? What seed must be preserved for planting? How generous can you afford to be today? Nobody needs to produce a written household spreadsheet. Your calculations exist in memory, habit, containers, and experience. You settle beside the grinding stones. Rotary querns are known across Viking Age Scandinavia. Although older grinding methods also have long histories, a rotary quern typically uses two circular stones. Grain enters through an opening in the upper stone, which is turned so the kernels are crushed between the surfaces. Simple, effective, and repetitive. Very repetitive. You begin turning. Stone moves against stone. This sound establishes a steady rhythm. Scrape, turn, scrape, turn. At first it almost feels meditative. After a while, your shoulders may have a different opinion. Grinding grain is physically demanding, and experiments with historical technologies remind modern researchers just how much labour can hide behind basic food preparation. The exact time required varies with the quern. Grain, desired fineness, skill, and quantity. But flour does not appear after 3 decorative turns for the benefit of a camera. You keep going. Fine particles collect. Your hands adjust automatically. Perhaps another woman works nearby. Perhaps an older child helps. In a larger household, an enslaved worker may perform much of this repetitive labour. That distinction matters. When we say a Viking woman grinds grain, we risk blending women of very different status into one convenient figure. A wealthy mistress may supervise food supplies while another woman does the hardest grinding. A poorer free farmer's wife may do it herself. An enslaved woman may have little choice about how many hours she spends at the stone. The sound may be similar. The lives are not. Archaeologists sometimes find skeletal evidence of repetitive physical stress. Though connecting particular changes in human remains to one exact task requires caution, bodies preserve patterns of labour imperfectly. They can tell researchers that people worked hard without providing a neat diary of every movement. Your arms, however, require no archaeological interpretation. They know. You pause briefly. The grain is becoming meal or flour. Some of it will be used for porridge. Some may become bread. Viking Age bread survives occasionally in remarkable archaeological contexts, sometimes carbonized into small blackened pieces. Such remains can reveal ingredients and preparation methods, though they naturally represent only fragments of a much larger culinary world. Bread may be made from barley, rye, oats, wheat, peas, or mixtures depending on circumstances and region. Grinding technology can leave flour coarser than modern industrial flour, and tiny mineral particles from grinding stones may sometimes enter the food. Your dentist from the future would like a word. Unfortunately, your dentist has not been invented. Dental wear in past populations can be significant, though diet, preparation techniques, age, and many other factors influence it. Teeth recovered from Viking Age burials often reveal a complicated picture of health, rather than the cartoon assumption that everyone loses half their teeth by 20. People even appear to clean or manipulate their teeth in various ways. You return to grinding. Eventually you have enough. Now liquid can be added to prepare dough. Bread-making methods vary. Some breads are flat and relatively simple, while others may be thicker or prepared differently. Fermentation is possible, and people certainly understand processes that cause dough and beverages to change, even if nobody knows the microbiology involved. You know what works because someone taught you. That is one of the most important libraries in your world. Memory. Recipes are rarely written down for you. Measurements are not standardized into neat modern units. You learn texture. You learn smell. You learn how dough should feel against your fingers. Too wet, too dry, ready. You mix it. Flour sticks to your skin. A little water corrects one portion. More meal corrects another. Perhaps salt is available, although salt itself represents substantial labor and trade in many communities and cannot be treated as infinitely cheap. The dough becomes workable. You shape portions by hand. Bread may be cooked on heated stones, iron plates, pans, or other surfaces depending on place and household equipment. Ovens exist in parts of the wider medieval world, but the familiar large household baking oven should not simply be inserted into every Scandinavian farm. Your hearth remains the center of the operation. The fire you rescued earlier is now doing exactly what you needed it to do. Remember those tiny embers beneath the ash? They have become breakfast warmth and now cooking heat. Nothing in the household happens separately for long. You position the bread to cook. The smell slowly changes. Warm grain, smoke, toasted edges. It is modest, but comforting. Nearby, you consider the rest of the day's food. The Viking Age diet depends heavily upon seasonality. Summer and autumn can bring abundance, while winter transforms the household's relationship with food. Fresh resources diminish. Stored and preserved foods become essential. Fish may be dried, smoked, salted, fermented, or consumed fresh depending on region and circumstance. Meat can also be preserved. Dairy products extend the usefulness of milk. Berries and plants may be gathered when available. Hazelnuts appear archaeologically at many sites. Cabbage-like plants, onions, peas, beans, and other cultivated or gathered foods contribute to diets, though the precise vegetable garden of any particular household is difficult to reconstruct. The old stereotype of Vikings surviving entirely on meat and ale is wonderfully dramatic. It is also a good way to develop nutritional problems. You probably eat far more plant material and grain than heroic television feasts suggest. Ale or other fermented grain drinks are part of the food culture too. But strength varies, and water remains fundamental. The notion that medieval people never drink water because it is universally unsafe is one of those myths that refuses to die quietly. You know where clean water can be found. Your settlement depends on it. You turn one piece of bread. The underside has browned. Good. Not perfect. Perfect is a modern luxury. Edible is excellent. Another piece cooks faster near the hottest part of the hearth, so you move it. Fire demands constant adjustment. There is no temperature dial. You judge heat from experience, distance, flame, embers, and the behavior of the food itself. A child watches. Perhaps this is how that child learns. Not through a lesson announced formally, but by being present. Watch the dough. Turn it now. Not there, it will burn. Use less water. Every correction carries knowledge forward. You finish one batch and set it aside. Some may be eaten later today, depending on preparation. Other bread may keep longer. Food preservation is always lurking behind ordinary cooking because future hunger is never entirely abstract. A prosperous year can encourage confidence. A poor year teaches caution. Environmental evidence shows that Viking Age Scandinavia is not uniformly frozen or barren. Farming can be productive, particularly in favourable regions, yet northern agriculture remains vulnerable to weather. A late frost, excessive rain, drought, livestock disease, or poor harvest can push households toward difficulty. Your stores are therefore more than food. They are time. Every preserved cheese buys time. Every sack of grain buys time. Every dried fish buys time. Winter is negotiated months before snow arrives. You wipe flour from your fingers. The bread rests nearby. The grain container is closed again. There is more grinding to do eventually, because there is always more grinding to do eventually. But another material has been quietly waiting for you. Wool. You have already seen it walking around outside on 4 legs. Now part of it sits cleaned and prepared inside the household, waiting to become something far more valuable than a loose bundle of fibre. You take some between your fingers, soft in places, coarse in others. A simple spindle lies nearby. The grain has become food. Now wool must become thread, and this task will follow you through far more of the day than a modern person might ever expect. You draw a small amount of wool away from the prepared fibres and tease it gently between your fingers. The transformation seems almost ridiculous when you think about it. A loose cloud of animal fibre is supposed to become a strong, continuous thread. That thread must later survive the tension of weaving, the strain of wearing, repeated repairs, damp weather, hard work, and perhaps years of use. And you are going to accomplish this with your fingers, a stick, and a small weighted object. The stick is the spindle. Near its lower portion sits a spindle whorl, a weight that helps maintain rotation. Archaeologists find spindle whorls throughout Viking Age settlements and burials, made from materials such as stone, clay, bone, and other substances. They are small objects, almost disappointingly small. Place one beside a sword in a museum and most visitors will probably look at the sword first. Yet the spindle whorl may represent far more hours of ordinary Viking life. You attach the fibre and begin. Your fingers draw out a narrow strand. The spindle turns. The fibres twist together. You draw more. Turn, draw, turn. Soon a length of yarn begins forming. The movement is familiar enough that you do not need to stare continuously at your hands. Experienced spinners can work while watching children, talking, walking, supervising animals, or participating in other household activities. This portability makes spinning particularly useful. The loom must remain where it stands. The spindle can follow you, and it does. For hours, for years, perhaps for much of your life. Textile historians attempting to reconstruct Viking Age cloth repeatedly encounter the enormous labour hidden inside it. Before weaving even begins, sheep must be cared for and wool collected. Fleece then needs sorting and preparation. Fibers may be cleaned and arranged according to the method being used. Then comes spinning. A great deal of spinning. How long exactly? That depends on fiber quality, yarn thickness, skill, tools, and intended textile. Experimental archaeology can provide estimates, but there is no single magical figure for one Viking dress or sail. What remains beyond dispute is that substantial textiles require extraordinary quantities of yarn. You spin another length, and another. Your fingertips control thickness. Too much fiber creates an uneven, heavy section. Too little creates weakness. The spindle drops while rotating, pulling gently as gravity helps maintain tension. You wind completed yarn onto it and begin again. A modern observer might call the task monotonous. You might call it Tuesday. Repetition is not unusual in your world. Grain grinding repeats, milking repeats, water carrying repeats, fire tending repeats, food preparation repeats. The difference is that textile work can occupy spare moments between all of them. There is almost no such thing as empty time. Waiting for food to cook, spin. Watching livestock, spin. Talking with a neighbour, spin. Enjoying a quiet evening by the fire. Excellent. More spinning. The spindle is effectively the Viking Age version of receiving work emails after office hours, except nobody has invented the office yet. You continue drawing fibres. The wool itself is not uniform. Sheep can produce different kinds of fibres within the fleece, including softer underwool and longer outer fibres depending on breed and coat. These can be selected, combined, or prepared differently for particular textiles. Archaeological textile fragments reveal considerable technical sophistication. Different spinning directions are used. Different thread counts appear. Different weave structures exist. Some fabrics are coarse and practical. Others are surprisingly fine. This is not crude work performed by people who barely understand textiles. It is skilled production built upon generations of accumulated knowledge. Your fingers are part of that tradition. You learned long before adulthood. Perhaps your mother taught you. Perhaps another woman in the household did. Maybe an older sister corrected the first thick, lumpy thread you proudly produced as a child. Nobody needed to explain textile physics. You learned what good yarn feels like. That kind of knowledge is difficult for archaeology to recover because skill does not fossilize. The tool survives. The hand disappears. You glance toward another person working nearby. If several women are spinning, conversation can accompany the work. Household news moves easily through these shared hours. You hear about a neighbour's marriage prospects, livestock problems, an argument over land, a traveller expected from the coast, or rumours brought from farther away. The Viking world is connected by speech. Most people do not sit privately reading news. Information arrives through people, travellers, merchants, relatives, visitors, assemblies, stories told beside fires. Women participate in these networks even when their movements and formal political roles differ from those of men. A household is not sealed away from public life. Marriage itself creates connections between families. So does fosterage. So does trade. So does conflict. While your spindle turns, the social world turns with it. You hear names, remember obligations, notice tensions, store information. The idea that domestic labour isolates you entirely from society would misunderstand how a farm household functions. The household is itself a major social and economic institution. Your work produces wealth. That is especially obvious when you consider cloth. Textiles can be exchanged, finished garments have value, wool has value, yarn has value. Cloth can even function within systems of standardized exchange in parts of the Norse world, particularly in later Icelandic contexts where homespun cloth becomes economically significant. We should be careful not to project every later Icelandic practice backward onto your farm in the year 850. Still, the wider lesson holds: textiles matter economically. Then there are sales. You look at the growing yarn on your spindle and imagine, perhaps, a ship. The great expansion associated with the Viking Age depends not merely upon timber, iron, navigation, and warriors. Ships need sails, and sails require huge amounts of textile production. Researchers debate exactly how early Scandinavian sails are made, which fibres dominate in different contexts, how sails are treated for durability, and how production is organised. Woolen sails are strongly associated with Norse maritime technology, while linen and other materials enter discussions depending on time and place. Whatever the details, a large sail represents staggering labour. Sheep must provide wool. Wool must be processed. Fibre must be spun. Yarn must be woven. The textile must be finished and prepared. One famous ship sailing elegantly toward the horizon therefore carries an invisible workforce with it, mostly uncelebrated, frequently female. You twist another strand. There is something almost strange about this relationship. A man may gain fame by sailing across the sea. A woman may spend months helping produce what allows him to sail there. The saga remembers his destination. The cloth remembers her fingers. Of course, not every piece of yarn becomes a sail. Most of what surrounds you is closer to the body and household. Clothing, blankets, bags, coverings, belts or bands, practical textiles used for countless purposes. Clothing in particular consumes labour relentlessly because people wear it while performing physical work. Fabric tears, seams fail, edges fray, children grow. Dampness and dirt take their toll. You cannot simply produce one wardrobe and declare textile work finished. It never finishes. The spindle slows. You set it moving again. Perhaps the fibres have been dyed already, or perhaps dyeing will occur later depending on the material and intended product. Viking Age textiles survive with evidence for colours derived from plants and other natural sources. Blues, reds, yellows, browns, and combinations are possible, though access to particular dyes and intensity varies with resources and status. The popular image of everyone dressed exclusively in dull brown is too bleak. The opposite image, in which every farmer wanders around wearing perfectly saturated jewel colours, is too convenient. Reality is more interesting. Colour can communicate wealth, so can cloth quality, so can decorative bands, embroidery, jewellery and imported materials. Even practical clothing can carry identity. You continue spinning. The fire crackles nearby. Outside, the farmyard remains active. Someone enters and cold air briefly pushes through the room. A child crosses your view. A vessel is moved closer to the hearth. Your spindle continues turning through all of it. Slowly, almost invisibly, the bundle of prepared fibre shrinks. The yarn grows. This is how enormous projects are created in your world. Not suddenly, not dramatically, a few feet at a time, minute after minute, day after day. You finally stop and inspect the yarn wound around the spindle. Useful, strong, still nowhere near enough, naturally. You stretch your fingers. There will be more spinning later. Perhaps this evening when the outdoor work has quietened and firelight gathers everyone closer together. But some of the yarn already produced by your household is waiting elsewhere. Along one wall stands a larger piece of equipment. Tall, wooden, patient. Threads hang vertically from it, weighted toward the floor. The spindle has created the thread. Now the loom is waiting to turn hundreds of those threads into cloth. You rise and move toward it. You stand before the loom and look upward. Compared with the spindle, it's a commanding object. The upright wooden frame occupies real space inside the household, and the work attached to it cannot simply be slipped into a pouch when someone calls you outside. In much of the Viking world, one important form is the warp-weighted loom. Its basic principle is straightforward. Long warp threads hang vertically from a beam, and weights attached near the bottom keep them under tension. Archaeologists recover these loom weights in large numbers, sometimes long after the wooden structure itself has vanished. Once again, the least glamorous objects tell an enormous story. A group of stones or baked clay weights lying in the earth may look unimpressive. To you, they mean cloth. You inspect the hanging threads. The loom has already required considerable preparation before weaving can begin. Warp threads must be measured and arranged. Tension matters. Mistakes made here can follow you through the entire textile. The setup alone requires knowledge. Then the actual weaving begins. You separate alternating groups of warp threads to create an opening called the shed. Through this opening passes the weft yarn. The arrangement changes. The next strand passes through, and gradually the fabric grows. Your hands begin the familiar sequence. Open. Pass. Beat. Change. Pass again. The sounds are soft but distinct. Wood touches wood. Fibres pull. Weights shift gently below. You work steadily. The cloth emerging from this process may use a simple weave, but Viking Age textile makers also produce more complex structures, including twills. Archaeological fragments show variations in thread thickness, density, spinning direction, and weaving technique. Some fabrics are coarse enough for heavy practical use. Others are remarkably fine. That matters because the word homemade can mislead modern ears. Your cloth is made at home, but that does not mean amateur. You're part of an economy in which textile knowledge is fundamental. A skilled weaver can control tension, density, pattern, and quality with precision built from years of practice. You notice a thread sitting incorrectly. Your fingers correct it before it becomes a larger problem. A novice might not even see the mistake. You do. Skill often looks like nothing happening. The absence of error is the evidence. You pass another strand through. It is tempting to imagine Viking textile work as a quiet hobby for winter evenings, something done after the serious business of farming is finished. The numbers refuse to cooperate with that picture. A household requires clothing for multiple people. Bedding and coverings need textiles. Bags and practical household fabrics wear out. Trade can create additional demand. Maritime communities may require sailcloth on a scale that makes an ordinary tunic seem almost merciful. Experimental archaeologists have attempted to calculate the labour required for reconstructed Viking Age sails, and estimates vary according to assumptions. Even conservative reconstructions can involve thousands of working hours when fibre preparation, spinning, weaving, and finishing are included. Thousands. Suddenly the famous longship looks less like the achievement of a few shipwrights. It becomes the final expression of an entire community's labour. The shipbuilder shapes the hull. The smith produces iron fittings and tools. Woodcutters supply timber. Farmers support the workforce. And textile producers create the broad surface that catches the wind. You pull the weft snugly into position. Imagine a sail spread above a ship. Large, heavy, strong enough to endure wind and spray. Every visible line of cloth began as individual fibres. Every fibre passed through human hands, perhaps yours. There is scholarly debate about how sail production is organised and how widely particular sail technologies spread during different parts of the Viking Age. Direct archaeological survival of sails is limited because textiles decay easily. Researchers therefore combine fragments, ship evidence, later sources, experimental reconstruction, and knowledge of traditional textile techniques. Certainty comes in pieces. That is often how this period reaches us. A loom weight here, a textile fragment there, a ship buried elsewhere. Later poetry remembering something older. None of these alone gives you the complete room you're standing in. Together, they allow it to slowly reappear. You continue weaving. The loom weights hang below like patient little assistants whose only job is to obey gravity. At least someone in the household never complains. If a weight breaks, however, it can be replaced relatively easily depending on its material. Their size and form vary. Researchers study weight distribution to understand how looms may have been arranged and what types of textiles could have been produced. You would probably find it strange that people in the distant future measure your loom weights with great excitement. You simply want the warp tension to remain correct. The fabric grows downward or upward according to loom setup and technique. Slowly enough that progress can seem almost insulting. A little more cloth, then a little more. You may work beside another woman. Larger textiles can benefit from cooperation, and different stages of production can involve several people. A child watches for a while. Perhaps you hand over a simpler task. Children learn through participation. A young girl may begin textile work long before adulthood, first handling fibres, then spinning uneven thread, then improving. Boys may also encounter textile tasks. Although archaeological associations and later traditions strongly connect much textile production with women, gendered labour exists, but necessity has a habit of ignoring perfect categories. A household does what needs doing. Your own position affects the work as well. If you are the mistress of a prosperous farm, you may control textile stores and organise the labour of others. Keys found in some female graves have often been interpreted as symbols connected with household authority. Although archaeologists debate how literally such objects should be understood, a key can open a chest. It can also carry symbolic meaning, and burial objects are selected by the living, which makes them complicated evidence for everyday identity. Still, control over stored goods matters. Imagine the household's wealth not as coins stacked in a box, but as things: grain, animals, tools, silver, food stores, clothing, yarn, cloth. Your knowledge of where these resources are and how quickly they are being consumed gives you influence. The cloth before you is therefore not merely something warm to wear. It is stored labour. A length of good fabric represents wool, pasture, animals, preparation, spinning, weaving, and time. So you treat it carefully. When clothing eventually tears, you repair it. When a garment can no longer serve its original purpose. Usable pieces may survive as patches or smaller objects. Nothing about fabric encourages waste. You pass the weft again. Your shoulders begin to feel the posture. You adjust. The light inside the house has changed since morning. Daylight now finds its way more confidently into the interior. The fire still burns, but you no longer depend on it for every visible detail. You can see the colour of the yarn more clearly. Viking textiles are not restricted to brown, grey, and mud-coloured sadness. Natural wool itself comes in varied shades, and dyeing can create additional colours. Blue can come from woad. Certain plants can produce yellows. Madder is associated with red shades. Though availability and trade affect who can use particular dyes and how intensively, some dyes require complex preparation. Others depend on mordants or careful handling. Colour therefore carries another layer of labour and knowledge. Imported textiles can carry prestige too. Viking trade networks reach astonishing distances, connecting Scandinavia with the British Isles, continental Europe, the Baltic, the Islamic world, Byzantium, and routes extending farther east. Fragments of silk found in high-status Scandinavian contexts reveal just how far luxury materials can travel. You're unlikely to spend an ordinary farm morning wrapped from head to foot in imported silk. That would be a rather efficient way to announce that historical accuracy has left the building. But small quantities of prestigious fabric or decorative material can matter enormously. Clothing tells people things: who you are, what household you belong to, what resources you command, perhaps where your connections reach. The loom therefore participates in identity as much as survival. You work another section, then you stop. Not because the textile is finished. It is nowhere near finished. Of course it isn't. You run your fingers over the newly woven surface. Firm, even, useful. Behind every few inches lies the spinning you performed earlier, and behind that lies the sheep you checked in the morning. The chain is becoming visible. Animal, fibre, thread, cloth. Soon cloth will become clothing, and clothing will carry another language entirely. One written in cut, colour, jewellery, repair, cleanliness, and the subtle signs by which people recognise status without needing anyone to explain it. You leave the loom standing patiently behind you and reach toward a garment that has been waiting for repair. You lift the garment and find the damaged place almost immediately. The tear is small. Good. Small problems are cheaper than large ones, especially when the thing being repaired contains days or weeks of accumulated labour. You turn the fabric toward the light. The fibres around the damaged area have begun to weaken. Perhaps the cloth caught against rough timber. Perhaps repeated movement has worn it thin. Perhaps someone has simply been using the garment exactly as clothing is used in a farming household, which is to say, without treating it like a museum exhibit. You choose thread and prepare to mend it. The needle may be made from iron, bronze, or bone, depending on what's available. Archaeologists find needles and needle cases at Viking Age sites. Reminders that sewing is as necessary as weaving. Your stitches do not need to impress anyone. They need to hold. You draw the torn edges together carefully. Through. Pull. Through again. The repair slowly closes. You would probably find the modern idea of fast fashion incomprehensible. Cloth is too expensive in labour to discard because a seam has opened, or because someone has decided that last year's sleeve shape is emotionally exhausting. You mend, then mend again. Patches are normal. Garments can be altered. Usable fabric may eventually be recycled into something smaller. A textile can have several lives before it finally becomes waste. Your own clothing follows the same logic. Exactly what a Viking woman wears in the year 850 depends on region, status, age, and circumstance. Archaeologists reconstruct clothing from textile fragments, grave finds, brooch positions, artistic representations, and later, evidence. But complete outfits rarely survive. One garment strongly associated with Scandinavian women in parts of the Viking Age is the suspended or strap dress, often reconstructed as an overdress held by paired brooches near the upper chest. Beneath it may be a linen or woolen undergarment, but even here caution is useful. Fashion changes, regional differences matter. Not every Scandinavian woman wears one standardized Viking uniform. The paired oval brooches so familiar from museums are particularly visible in certain burial traditions, which means our evidence can be shaped by who is buried, how they are buried, and what objects are chosen for the grave. The dead are not a random sample of the living. You smooth the repaired cloth. If you possess decorative brooches, they are useful as well as attractive. They fasten clothing while displaying craftsmanship, material, and perhaps social identity. Bronze is common for many ornaments. Silver and gold can signal greater wealth. Beads may hang between brooches. Glass beads arrive in different colours and forms. Some are locally produced, others travel through trade. A tiny bead can therefore contain a surprisingly large geography. You might hold something made from material that has crossed seas and rivers through several exchanges before reaching your household. The Viking world is far less isolated than its rural farmsteads sometimes appear. You set the repaired garment aside and adjust your own clothing. Wool surrounds much of your life because it's practical in northern climates. Linen is valued too, produced from flax through another demanding sequence of cultivation and processing. Growing flax is only the beginning. The plant must be harvested, processed so the useful fibres can be separated, prepared, spun, and woven. If wool is patient work, linen apparently decides patience has not suffered enough. The resulting fabric, however, can be fine and comfortable. Wealthier people can afford more material, finer weaving, stronger colours, elaborate ornament, and imported luxuries. Poorer households make careful use of what they possess. Status is visible, but not always loudly. A finer weave, a better brooch, more beads, a dyed border, a cleaner garment worn for an important gathering. Small differences speak clearly when everyone understands their cost. You reach for a comb. This object might surprise someone who imagines Viking life as 1,000 years of enthusiastic dirt. Combs are common archaeological finds in Viking Age contexts. Many are carefully made, often from antler or bone, with rows of teeth fitted into composite construction. Some come with protective cases. They are practical objects. Hair tangles. Lice are a concern. Appearance matters. You draw the comb through your hair, slowly, carefully. Personal grooming is not a modern invention, and evidence from Viking settlements suggests that combs, tweezers, razors, ear spoons, and other small grooming implements can be part of material culture. This does not mean everyone enjoys modern standards of hygiene. There is no hot shower waiting behind a timber door, but neither are you wandering permanently beneath a ceremonial layer of dirt. Water is available for washing. Bathing customs vary. Later written accounts famously describe Norse people washing regularly enough for outsiders to notice, though those sources belong to different times and contexts and should be handled cautiously. One well-known later English complaint even suggests Scandinavians gain romantic advantage by bathing, changing clothes, and grooming themselves. Apparently cleanliness has always been suspicious when practiced by foreigners. You continue combing. How is your hair arranged? That is less certain. Artistic representations and later descriptions suggest different hairstyles. But identifying universal rules is impossible. Hair can be braided, tied, covered, or worn in other practical arrangements. A working woman needs it controlled. Long loose hair drifting beautifully across your face while you lean over an open hearth may look excellent in a painting. It is less impressive when it catches fire. You secure it. A head covering may be worn depending on region, age, marital status, activity, and interpretation of the evidence. Scholars debate details because textile headwear survives poorly and images are not always straightforward. This uncertainty is worth keeping. Historical reconstruction becomes misleading when every unanswered question is quietly replaced by confidence. Sometimes the correct answer is simply we do not know exactly. You glance down at your hands. They are working hands. Fingernails accumulate dirt from animals, grain, ash, fibers, food, and soil. You wash when practical, especially before certain food tasks. Soap is known in the broader medieval Scandinavian world, although exactly how often different people use it and for what purposes is harder to establish. Soap can be produced using fats and alkaline substances derived from ash. Again, ordinary household knowledge transforms simple materials into something useful. There are later claims that Scandinavians use strong soap preparations on their hair, sometimes connected with bleaching. Such descriptions are intriguing but cannot automatically tell us what every woman in the year 850 does. Your hair colour remains safely your own. You reach toward a small piece of jewellery. Perhaps it is a brooch, perhaps a bead, perhaps a pendant. Jewellery is not merely decoration. Some pieces carry practical functions, others communicate wealth, affiliation, belief, memory, or connection. Objects can have biographies. A brooch may be inherited, silver may be melted and reshaped. A bead may travel farther during its existence than you ever will. You fasten what you need. There is no full-length mirror. Polished metal can provide a reflection, and small mirrors exist in parts of the Viking world through trade. But most people do not spend the morning examining themselves from every angle. Other people become your mirrors. They notice whether your clothing is respectable, whether your hair is arranged, whether a brooch is valuable, whether a garment is poorly maintained. Appearance matters because reputation matters. The sagas written centuries later are obsessed with reputation, clothing, gifts, insult, honour, and social signals. They cannot be read as direct transcripts of the 9th century, but they preserve a world in which people pay close attention to how others present themselves. You do too. Not because you are vain, because clothing communicates. You finish the repair and inspect it once more. The stitches will hold. The garment returns to use. Another tiny domestic problem has been defeated without anyone composing poetry about it. You place the needle somewhere safe. Leaving a small, sharp object loose on the floor of a dim longhouse would be an excellent way to make the afternoon memorable for entirely the wrong reason. A child moves nearby. Then another voice calls. Your attention shifts immediately. The quiet minutes spent mending are over. Children do not wait politely while adults finish historical demonstrations. They need food, supervision, correction, work of their own. And while you teach them how to survive within this household, they are also learning something larger without realizing it. They are learning how to become Viking Age adults simply by following you through the day. The child beside you has been watching more carefully than you realized. Small fingers reach toward the thread you have just put away, and you intercept them before your carefully organised sewing becomes a knot with ambitions. You hand over something safer instead. This is how much of education works in your household. There is no school bell announcing that childhood has ended for the morning and formal learning has begun. Knowledge surrounds the child continuously. It sits beside the hearth, hangs from the loom, walks around the farmyard, grows in the fields, and waits inside every adult task. Children watch, then they imitate. Eventually they help. The boundary between playing and learning can be wonderfully unclear. A very young child might pretend to grind grain with small stones, or copy spinning movements without producing anything useful. Later, those movements become genuine work. Archaeologists sometimes find miniature objects that have been interpreted as toys, training pieces, ritual items, or simply small tools. And deciding between these possibilities can be difficult. A tiny object does not arrive with a label saying child's toy. The uncertainty is part of the evidence. What is certain is that children are everywhere in Viking Age society. Even though historical storytelling has a habit of filling the landscape almost entirely with adults. You look around your household. Children represent the future labour, alliances, inheritance, and continuity of the family. They also represent noise, a considerable amount of noise. Younger children require supervision, but constant supervision in the modern sense is difficult when every adult has work to perform. Babies and toddlers remain near working adults when possible. Older children can watch younger ones, grandparents, siblings, servants, foster relatives, and other household members may all participate in care. The nuclear family living privately behind one door is not the only model here. Your household may include several generations. Kinship matters deeply, so does fosterage in Norse society. Children can sometimes be raised for periods within other households, strengthening relationships between families. Later Icelandic sagas show foster relationships carrying powerful emotional and social importance. Although, as always, those texts are later than your morning in the year 850. Still, they reveal something useful. Family does not end neatly with biological parents. You call an older child closer. There is work suitable for smaller hands. Perhaps a child can gather kindling, carry a light container, watch poultry, help sort fibres, bring something from one side of the house to the other. The task is simple, but you watch how it is performed. Too careless. You correct it. Again, better. There is no long speech about responsibility. The child learns responsibility because an incorrectly closed enclosure can release an animal. Spilled grain cannot be recovered easily. And forgotten fuel means someone else must solve the problem later. Consequences are tangible. That does not mean childhood is joyless. Children play. They run. They make things. They hear stories. They imitate adults. Games involving balls, boards, small carved objects, physical contests, and imaginative play are known or suggested from archaeological and later literary evidence. Some toys survive, including small wooden animals, boats, swords, and dolls or human-shaped figures. Though interpretation varies, a miniature ship can be a toy. It can also teach. A child pushing one across water learns something about shape and movement long before anyone explains naval architecture. You watch one child disappear toward the doorway and immediately remind them of the task they were given. Some historical experiences are eternal. You return to the younger one. Teaching differs according to gender, but not as rigidly as a modern chart might suggest. Girls are likely to learn many skills associated with women's household labour, especially textile production and food processing. Boys may spend more time learning particular agricultural, craft, hunting, maritime, or martial skills. Yet farms require flexibility. Everyone needs basic competence. A girl may help with livestock. A boy may carry water. Both gather fuel. Both learn weather. Both understand animals. Both know what hunger means if work is neglected. Status again changes everything. A wealthy child experiences childhood differently from an enslaved child. Enslaved people form part of Viking Age society through warfare, raiding, trade, punishment, debt, and birth into unfree status. An enslaved child may begin labour early and possess far less control over the future. The word childhood therefore hides several realities. Your own children, if you are free and reasonably secure, still face risks that would trouble a modern parent. Disease can arrive quickly. Injuries can become dangerous. Food shortages affect young bodies severely. Infant and childhood mortality are high by modern standards, though precise rates vary, and skeletal evidence has limitations. Loss. Perhaps not personally today, but socially. Every settlement does. That awareness may shape affection rather than reduce it. The old assumption that parents in high mortality societies avoid emotional attachment because children might die has little support as universal rule. Human grief is visible across cultures and centuries. You touch the child's hair briefly. Then work resumes. Affection has to coexist with chores. You show an older girl how to prepare fibre. She has done this before. Not perfectly, but better than last season. Her fingers separate the material. You adjust her grip. She tries again. One day she may spin while talking without looking down, just as you do now. One day she may stand before a loom and recognize a misplaced thread instantly. Skill accumulates invisibly. So does cultural knowledge. Children learn more than tasks from you. They learn manners. Who receives the best seat? Who is served first under particular circumstances? How guests are welcomed? Which relatives deserve respect? Which neighbour is trusted? Which neighbour is definitely not trusted? Though everyone remains wonderfully polite when he visits, they learn stories about ancestors. They learn place names. They learn boundaries between farms. They learn which paths are safe. They learn where berries grow and where animals graze. They learn what weather coming over a ridge may mean. They learn when to speak, and sometimes, perhaps more importantly, when not to. The Viking world relies heavily upon oral memory. Writing exists. Runes are used for inscriptions, messages, ownership marks, memorials, magic in some contexts and other purposes. But widespread book-based literacy is not organising your daily household. Most knowledge passes through voices and hands. You tell a child something because someone once told you. That chain can stretch backward farther than anyone remembers. A plant is useful. A mushroom is dangerous. A particular animal behaves badly before a storm. This family owns that meadow. That mound belongs to ancestors. Never waste the winter grain. The child absorbs all of it. Some knowledge may be wrong. Tradition is not automatically perfect. But generations of practical observation create an impressive environmental understanding. You do not need a meteorological forecast to notice shortening days, wind direction, cloud formations, frost, animal behavior, or the smell of approaching rain. Children learn these signs too. The older child returns carrying kindling. Too much of it. A small mountain has somehow been assembled. You look at the bundle, then at the child. You ask for kindling, not the reconstruction of a forest. Still, enthusiasm has its uses. You take part of it and tell the child where the rest should be stored. Storage itself becomes a lesson. Dry fuel belongs somewhere dry. Food must be protected. Tools return to their places. Sharp objects stay away from younger hands. Household order is not about aesthetic perfection. It prevents wasted time and damaged resources. The children gradually scatter back into their tasks. For a moment, you listen. Someone laughs outside. Another voice answers. A dog barks. The loom weights shift faintly behind you. This is what continuity sounds like. Not kings, not battles, children learning where the firewood goes. You may never travel beyond the surrounding region. Your name may never appear in an inscription. No future poet may know that you existed, but knowledge passing through your hands can outlive you. The girl learning fibre preparation may teach another child decades from now. The boy learning to judge livestock may one day manage a farm. The stories you repeat may become stories their grandchildren repeat. Your household reproduces culture as steadily as the loom produces cloth. Then your attention turns toward food again. Of course it does. The fire has remained useful, and the fresh milk from earlier cannot simply sit indefinitely. There are ingredients to prepare, containers to check, and stores whose condition matters more with every passing week. You glance toward the vessels. Feeding children today is only half the problem. A competent household must also feed them when fields are frozen. Animals produce less, and nothing useful seems willing to grow. The next meal is waiting, so is winter, and much of your midday work exists somewhere between the two. You turn back toward the vessels near the hearth. The fresh milk from this morning is still valuable, but value does not guarantee patience. Milk begins changing quickly, without refrigeration. You cannot place it in a cold white box and forget about it until someone discovers it 3 weeks later and begins an archaeological investigation of their own. You must decide what happens to it. Some can be consumed relatively fresh, some can sour naturally, some may be transformed into butter, cheese, or other cultured dairy foods that keep longer and concentrate nutrition. The exact dairy traditions of Viking Age Scandinavia vary by region and household, and later Scandinavian practices cannot simply be copied backward unchanged. Archaeologists instead combine residues in vessels, animal bones, tools, environmental evidence, experimental reconstruction, and later descriptions to understand what is possible. For you, there's nothing theoretical about it. You know what milk looks like when it is behaving properly. You know its smell, its texture, its temperature. You know when something has gone wrong. This knowledge is not written down, it lives in repetition. You begin working with the milk. If cream is separated, it can eventually contribute to butter production. Churning requires sustained physical effort. The motion must continue long enough for fat globules to gather together. At first, nothing dramatic happens. Then still nothing dramatic happens. Then your arms begin asking why butter cannot simply form out of respect. You continue. Eventually the texture changes. Small masses of butter emerge from the liquid. The remaining buttermilk is useful too. Food processing in your household rarely creates a convenient category called useless. Byproducts can be consumed, fed to animals, incorporated into other preparations, or used in ways learned through experience. You gather the butter. It is precious energy. Fat matters enormously in a physically demanding world, especially during colder months. Butter can be eaten, stored under suitable conditions, perhaps salted where salt is available, and incorporated into other foods. You treat it accordingly. No casual half-inch layer across warm toast simply because it is Sunday. The Viking Age has many pleasures. Unlimited butter is not among them. Nearby, another dairy process may already be underway. Cheesemaking allows milk to become something more durable and portable, depending on method. Milk can be coagulated, curds separated from whey, then drained, pressed, aged, or eaten relatively fresh. How exactly you accomplish coagulation can vary. Animal rennet is one possibility known across traditional cheesemaking cultures. Natural souring can also play a role. Again, there is no single Viking cheese. The archaeological record refuses to provide a convenient supermarket shelf. You handle the curds carefully. Their texture changes beneath your fingers. Whey drains away. Another transformation. Milk from the animal becomes food that may survive far longer than fresh milk would. This is the central logic of preservation. You're converting abundance now into survival later. The same logic applies beyond dairy. Think of the seasons around you. In summer, daylight stretches astonishingly long in northern latitudes, plants grow, animals graze, fish can be caught, berries ripen, herbs and useful wild plants appear, gardens and fields offer food. Then the year turns, days shorten, temperatures fall, pastures lose productivity, snow may cover the ground. The landscape that seemed generous becomes quiet. Winter food must therefore be created before winter arrives. You inspect stored supplies. Grain must remain dry. Dried foods must be protected from moisture. Rodents are permanent competitors. Mice have no respect whatsoever for household planning. A damaged storage container can cost you meals. A leaking roof can destroy months of work. You check, touch, smell. Look, spoilage often announces itself before anyone tastes it. Your senses are instruments. A modern food label gives dates. Your nose gives opinions. You trust the nose. Fish is especially important in many Scandinavian communities, though access naturally depends on geography. Coastal households and settlements near rivers or lakes can exploit rich aquatic resources. Cod, lol, herring, salmon, freshwater fish, shellfish, and other species appear in archaeological evidence depending on region. Fish can be eaten fresh, but preservation turns it into something more powerful. Drying is particularly effective in suitable climates. Fish can also be smoked, salted, or fermented according to method and resources. Salt production and access vary considerably, making heavily salted food easier in some places than others. Stockfish will later become one of the great commodities of the North Atlantic world. Large-scale trade develops especially strongly in later centuries, but the underlying technology of drying fish has deep roots. You understand the principle perfectly. Remove enough moisture and decay slows. Smoke can help preserve certain foods too. The smell of preservation becomes part of household life. Smoke, salt where available, fermentation, drying meat, souring milk. None sounds glamorous. All are more useful than glamour in February. You turn toward another store. Meat is precious because livestock represents continuing value while alive. A cow can produce calves and milk. A sheep can produce lambs and wool. Slaughtering an animal therefore involves calculation. Autumn often becomes an important period for deciding which animals can be supported through winter. Fodder is limited. Every animal kept alive must eat, so households may slaughter animals they cannot afford to feed through the cold months. Preserving meat for later. This creates another seasonal rhythm. Your winter food supply begins with summer grass. Grass feeds livestock. People cut hay. Hay feeds selected animals through winter. Other animals become preserved food. The system is ruthless only if viewed without understanding scarcity. Keeping every animal alive could mean feeding none of them adequately. You know the limits of your stores. You have to. The midday meal itself may be modest. Perhaps you eat bread prepared earlier with a dairy product, some fish, leftovers, or a simple cooked dish. The idea of 3 standardized meals appearing at exact modern times does not fit neatly across Viking Age Scandinavia. People eat according to work, daylight, resources, and custom. Later Norse texts refer to meals and daily rhythms, but using them to reconstruct your precise lunch schedule centuries earlier requires caution. So you eat because there is work to do and your body needs fuel. You sit briefly. That word matters. Briefly. The bread is dense and satisfying. Perhaps there is cheese beside it. You drink water, milk, whey, or a fermented beverage depending on what the household provides. All can be produced from grain, and brewing itself is another substantial domestic technology. Later Norse evidence connects women strongly with brewing in household contexts, although practices vary across time and place. Making ale requires grain that might otherwise become food, so even drinking has an economic calculation hiding beneath it. You finish eating. Someone reaches for another piece. You judge the supply. There is enough. Today, that final word follows you constantly. Today is not the only day you feed. Your household must survive tomorrow, next week, and the season beyond. You inspect containers again. Some may be wooden tubs, some ceramic, some made from soapstone. Some foods may be stored in pits, buildings, lofted spaces, chests, barrels, sacks, or specialized structures depending on local architecture and resources. Archaeology sometimes reveals storage buildings standing separately from houses. Raised structures can help protect food from dampness and animals. Grain storage practices vary, and every method has weaknesses. Fire is one. A household containing dry timber, straw, textiles, fuel, and open flame has reason to respect sparks. You do, The hearth is useful because you control it. An uncontrolled fire could destroy not merely a building, but food, tools, clothing, seed grain, and years of accumulated wealth. You check the cooking area almost instinctively. Safe. Then you return to preservation. Perhaps berries collected in season are dried or otherwise stored. Wild fruits provide sweetness and nutrients. Hazelnuts can keep well if properly dried. Peas and beans can be dried. Leafy plants and herbs are useful when fresh. While some can be dried, your diet follows the landscape more closely than a modern one. There are no tomatoes from another continent, no potatoes, no coffee, no chocolate, no refined sugar sitting in a bowl. Several foods that later become deeply associated with European cooking simply have not entered your world. Yet your meals need not be tasteless. Onions and related plants are known. Mustard may be available. Wild herbs provide flavour. Berries add sharpness or sweetness. Honey offers precious sweetness. The idea that historical food consists entirely of grey porridge eaten sadly beside a wall is unnecessarily cruel to your cooking. You know how to make familiar ingredients pleasant. You also know when pleasure must yield to conservation. The stored grain level is lower than after harvest. That is normal, but you notice it. You always notice it. A successful household does not discover in late winter that someone has been extravagantly feeding chickens the seed grain. Food management is power because mistakes have consequences. You close the container securely. Your hands rest on it for a moment. Inside is not merely grain. It is future bread, future porridge, seed for another harvest, protection against bad weather, insurance against hunger. That is why someone must know exactly what the household owns. Someone must decide what can be consumed, exchanged, gifted, or preserved. And as you turn away from the stores, the little practical objects at your clothing begin to carry a different meaning. Keys, containers, chests, supplies. The household may look like a collection of chores from the outside. From where you stand, it is something closer to an economy. And depending on your status within it, you may be far more than the person cooking beside the fire. You may be one of the people controlling what the household can afford to do next. You close the storage container and make certain it is secure. That small action would barely deserve attention in a heroic tale. No dragon appears, nobody draws a sword, no ship catches fire beneath a dramatic red sunset. Yet control of what lies inside that container can mean control over part of the household's future. Grain is wealth, cloth is wealth, tools are wealth, animals are wealth, preserved food is wealth. Silver is useful, certainly, and coins and weighed silver circulate within Viking Age exchange networks. But your economy is not built exclusively around money. Much value exists as useful things, and useful things must be stored, counted, protected, exchanged, and distributed. Someone needs to know where they are. In a substantial household, that responsibility can fall partly to its senior woman. You touch the key or keys associated with storage. Keys appear in a number of female Viking Age graves and have traditionally been interpreted as signs of the woman's responsibility for the household. The image is compelling the mistress carrying keys to chests and stores, physically controlling access to valuable resources. Modern archaeology adds caution. Not every key must mean exactly the same thing. Burial objects can symbolize identities rather than simply reproduce someone's daily possessions. A key might represent authority, status, domestic responsibility, or several ideas at once. Still, the association is meaningful. Locks protect valuable things. The person controlling access matters. You open a chest. Inside may be cloth, clothing, smaller valuables, tools, or other carefully stored possessions. Wooden chests are known archaeologically, including impressive examples associated with ships and burials. Some are reinforced or fitted with iron. Your own need not be magnificent. It simply needs to work. You inspect the contents. A length of woven fabric represents hundreds of decisions and many hours of labour. You do not hand it out casually. If someone needs a new garment, you must judge whether the material can be spared. A child will grow. An adult garment may require repair. Winter will demand warmer layers. Perhaps someone expects to travel. Perhaps cloth might be exchanged for something the farm cannot produce. Management means thinking beyond today's inconvenience. This is where the idea of the powerless Viking housewife becomes too simple. Free women in Scandinavian societies can possess meaningful economic and legal roles, though those roles differ across time and region. Later Norse laws preserve women's rights concerning property, inheritance, marriage settlements, and divorce under particular circumstances. But those laws are later. You are living in the mid-9th century. We cannot place a 13th century Icelandic law book on your table and pretend every clause applies unchanged. Custom evolves. Christianization later changes legal frameworks. Regional practices differ. Even so, evidence from burials, settlements, inscriptions, property patterns, and later tradition suggests that free Scandinavian women can hold substantial household authority. Authority is not equality. That distinction matters. Your society remains strongly hierarchical and gendered. Men dominate many formal political and military roles. Assemblies are largely male political spaces in the evidence available to us. Marriage links families as much as individuals. A woman's choices can be constrained by kinship, status, and expectations. Yet constrained does not mean irrelevant. Within the farm, your competence may be indispensable. You know the stores. You organize textile production. You understand food reserves. You may supervise servants, dependents, younger relatives, and enslaved workers. You can influence hospitality. You can preserve relationships with neighboring households. If your husband travels, your responsibilities may expand further. The household is not a small private corner separated from the economy. The household is the economy. You hear movement nearby. Another woman carries something toward the working area. Her status may be different from yours. Perhaps she's a relative, perhaps a servant, perhaps enslaved. This is where household authority becomes uncomfortable. The prosperity of some Viking Age households rests partly upon unfree labour. Raiding and warfare feed slave markets. Captives can be transported across long distances. Trading centres connect Scandinavian slaveholding with wider networks reaching into Western and Eastern Europe and beyond. Women are captured too. An enslaved woman may cook, grind grain, care for animals, process food, produce textiles, carry water, clean, or perform agricultural work. She may live physically close to free household members while occupying an entirely different legal world. You can tell her what to do. She cannot necessarily decide to leave. The difference is enormous. Archaeology struggles to identify slavery consistently because legal status does not leave a simple mark on a skeleton. Some unusual burials have been interpreted as evidence of enslaved individuals or dependents, while written sources from the wider Viking world describe slavery explicitly. The details remain debated. The institution does not. Thralls are part of Norse society. If your household owns enslaved people, your authority may therefore include command over people as well as objects. It is tempting to soften domestic history because kitchens and textiles feel less violent than battlefields. But power inside a home is still power. You give an instruction. Work continues. Perhaps grain must be moved. Perhaps wool needs sorting. Perhaps a child is assigned to assist an older worker. The ability to coordinate several people allows a prosperous farm to produce more than a tiny household could manage alone. Large farms require organization. Fields must be planted and harvested at the right time. Livestock must be moved. Hay must be cut. Food must be preserved. Buildings require maintenance. Textiles consume enormous labor. Guests may arrive unexpectedly. Seasonal workers or relatives may need feeding. One poor decision can create several new problems. You are therefore constantly prioritizing. What must happen now? What can wait? What will become worse if ignored? The answer changes with the season. During harvest, almost everything bends around bringing crops safely in. During lambing or calving, animals demand more attention. Before winter, food and fuel dominate thought. When travellers prepare to leave, supplies and clothing become urgent. Today is an ordinary day. Ordinary does not mean empty. You check another container. Enough. Then another. Less than you expected. You remember that food was used when visitors arrived recently. Hospitality has a cost, but refusing hospitality can have a cost too. Reputation matters enormously in societies where relationships provide security. Guests bring information. Gifts establish obligations. Generosity can display status. A prosperous household is expected to behave like one. Later Norse literature makes hospitality a recurring measure of character. A good host feeds travellers. A poor host risks contempt. Again, later stories are not security camera footage from the year 850, but hospitality is deeply practical in a world without hotels lining every road. Travellers depend upon households. One day your relatives may depend upon someone else's, so food is not only nutrition, it is social currency. You decide that the stores can tolerate another visitor if one appears. Probably. You close the container. Your judgment may seem small, but countless household decisions like this determine whether wealth grows or disappears. The same is true of property, if you are widowed. Your position may change significantly. Widows can sometimes exercise greater independence than married women because they may manage property without a husband. Archaeological evidence includes richly furnished female burials that suggest some women possess considerable status. A few women appear connected with elite households, trade, migration, and perhaps political influence. Most women are not elite. Neither are most men. History tends to preserve exceptional people because exceptional objects and stories are easier to notice. Your day reminds us that ordinary authority matters too. You do not need to command a kingdom to make decisions affecting 10 or 20 people. You do not need a throne to control valuable resources. Sometimes power looks like knowing which chest contains the winter cloth. You move through the household, answering questions as they arise. Yes, that tool can be used. No, that food is being saved. Move the wool somewhere dry, and do not let the younger child near the fire. Check the damaged fence again later. Simple instructions. A web of responsibility. Then a dog barks outside. Once, twice. The sound changes. Not the casual bark directed at a bird or goat. Someone is approaching. Conversation inside the house pauses for just a moment. You listen. Footsteps. Voices. Perhaps neighbours. Perhaps travellers. Perhaps someone carrying goods or news. You adjust your clothing almost automatically and glance toward the stores you have just inspected. Visitors mean hospitality. They may also mean exchange, information, negotiation, a request, a problem. The domestic world and the wider Viking world are about to meet at your doorway. And when they do, you will not simply disappear politely into the background. The dog reaches the doorway before you do. Its body is suddenly alert. Head forward, attention fixed on the approaching figures. You recognize at least one voice before anyone enters. Neighbours. That immediately lowers the tension, although not necessarily the amount of work. Visitors rarely arrive as empty events. They bring news, requests, objects, gossip, obligations, and occasionally appetites impressive enough to threaten the bread you prepared earlier. You greet them. Hospitality begins with recognition. Who has arrived matters. A close relative is treated differently from a stranger. A prosperous neighbour may carry social importance. A traveller from farther away may possess valuable information. You offer a place near the fire. Perhaps food follows, not a feast. There is an enormous distance between receiving visitors properly and slaughtering an ox every time someone walks past your fence. Bread, dairy food, perhaps preserved fish or another available dish can be enough for an ordinary visit. A drink may also be offered. The household adjusts around the newcomers. Children stare until corrected. Work does not stop completely. Someone continues handling wool. Another person tends the fire. The loom waits against the wall. Your visitors understand. Their household looks much the same in principle. One of them places a small bundle down. Now the visit becomes more interesting. Exchange in the Viking Age operates through several overlapping systems. Coins circulate in some contexts. Silver can be weighed. Foreign coins may be valued for their metal rather than their political symbolism. Hack silver, pieces cut from larger silver objects, becomes part of exchange in many Scandinavian contexts. But ordinary rural transactions need not involve silver every time. Goods can be exchanged directly. Labour can be owed. Gifts can create obligations. Services can be repaid later. You may trade cloth, yarn, food, animals, hides, tools, or other useful materials depending on what your household produces and needs. The bundle opens. Perhaps it contains something modest, such as a useful quantity of salt. That catches your attention immediately. Salt is not exciting until you live without refrigeration. Then salt becomes magnificent. It preserves food, improves flavour, and participates in dairy and meat processing. Coastal production methods, trade, and local availability vary across Scandinavia, so access is uneven. Your household has some. More would be useful. What can you offer? You think first of surplus rather than treasure. Perhaps yarn, perhaps cloth, perhaps butter, perhaps another stored product. You know what can be spared because you checked the stores earlier. That is, the connection between domestic management and trade. You cannot negotiate sensibly if you do not know what you own. A man may formally conduct certain exchanges, particularly large transactions or those involving wider legal relationships. But women are not absent from economic life. Evidence from Viking Age trading settlements has complicated the older image of commerce as exclusively male. Women's graves appear at trading centres. Textile equipment is widespread. Women migrate with Scandinavian communities. Some participate in craft production and household exchange. Exactly how many women operate as independent merchants remains debated. The evidence does not allow you to imagine every farmwife sailing to Constantinople with a personal trading company, nor does it support pretending women never negotiate anything. Your own exchange may be small. Small exchanges keep households functioning. You inspect the salt. Quality matters. You are not buying an abstract commodity. You are looking at something that will touch your family's food. You discuss quantity. The conversation is relaxed. But both sides understand value. Perhaps no agreement is reached immediately. That too is normal. You might remember what this neighbour needs and revisit the exchange later. Social relationships extend transactions through time. You help me now. I help you at harvest. Your household provides an animal. Mine provides labour. A gift creates expectation. A favour becomes memory. There are no electronic contracts. Reputation performs much of the work. This can make social trust extremely valuable. It can also make grudges extremely durable. Later, Icelandic sagas turn disputes over property, insults, inheritance, animals, and compensation into extraordinary chains of conflict. Those literary narratives belong to later centuries and are shaped by storytelling, but they reflect a society intensely concerned with rights and reputation. Your ordinary visit is less dramatic. Thankfully, nobody needs to begin a blood feud over a bowl of butter today. The visitors bring other information. A farm farther away has lost an animal. Someone is preparing for a marriage. A traveller has returned from a coastal settlement. A ship has arrived. Perhaps imported objects were seen there. Maybe silver, glass, fine cloth, a particular tool. News travels with goods. You listen carefully. The Viking world around the year 850 is expanding through extraordinary networks. Scandinavian ships move through the North Sea and Baltic. Norse groups have established settlements and bases in parts of the British Isles. Danes raid and campaign in Frankish territories. Swedish-connected traders travel east through river systems linking the Baltic with lands that ultimately connect toward Byzantium and the Islamic world. You may never see those places. Still, their existence can enter your home. A foreign coin may arrive. A glass bead. A piece of silk. A story. Even spices or luxury objects can move through elite networks. Although ordinary farm households should not be imagined casually seasoning every meal with exotic imports, Distance becomes tangible through objects. You pick up a bead your visitor carries. Its color is striking. Where was it made? Perhaps neither of you knows. That does not reduce its appeal. Archaeologists in the distant future may analyze its chemical composition and compare manufacturing techniques across regions to reconstruct trade. You simply turn it between your fingers and decide whether you like it. You do, unfortunately. Liking something and needing something are different categories. Salt wins. The practical choice. Again, you discuss what your household might exchange. Perhaps a measured amount of yarn is suitable. Textile production gives you goods with relatively concentrated value. Cloth can be transported more easily than a cow, which is generally considered polite trade behavior. You know the quality of the yarn. You produce some of it yourself. The neighbor knows your work. That matters. Skill creates reputation too. A household known for poor cloth may struggle to demand good value. A household known for reliable production gains leverage. You agree on terms. Nothing ceremonial happens. Goods change hands. Both sides remember the arrangement. Trade completed, but the visitors are not finished. One asks about an animal. Another mentions a boundary. Perhaps livestock from one farm has been grazing too close to another's land. Now your attention sharpens. Land is survival. Pasture determines how many animals can be supported. Hay meadows determine winter fodder. Woodland provides timber, fuel, grazing opportunities, wild foods, and other resources. Access rights matter. Boundaries matter. The landscape is not simply scenery. It is property, memory, and livelihood. You know which meadow belongs to your household. You know where animals usually graze. You may not hold every formal legal power yourself, but your practical knowledge is valuable in deciding what happened. You were there yesterday. You saw the animals. You explain. The visitors listen. This is another form of authority that leaves almost no archaeological trace. Knowledge. A future excavation can find your brooch. It cannot find the sentence you speak now. Yet sentences like this resolve countless everyday problems. Perhaps the matter can be handled informally. Someone will repair a fence. Animals will be moved. No assemblies required. Good. Formal disputes can become expensive and dangerous. Cooperation is usually preferable. Your visitors relax again. Conversation drifts. You offer another drink. Someone laughs. The children have stopped pretending not to listen. Perhaps one visitor tells a short story from the coast. A ship has returned with men who have been away for months. They carry silver and unfamiliar objects. They also carry losses. Not everyone returned. The room grows quieter for a moment. Travel brings wealth. It also brings uncertainty. The word Viking itself does not describe every Scandinavian person. Going on a Viking expedition is an activity associated with raiding or maritime ventures. Not a universal occupation or ethnic identity worn every morning. Most people spend most days doing exactly what surrounds you now. Farming, making, trading, raising families, maintaining relationships. The spectacular expeditions depend on this quieter world. You look at the cloth hanging near the loom. A traveller needs clothing. A ship needs provisions. A crew needs food. Perhaps a sail needs replacing. Someone has to produce all of it. Your visitors eventually stand. The visit has lasted long enough. There are still chores waiting at their own farm. You exchange farewells. The dog follows them outside briefly, then returns after determining that nobody has dropped food. You place the newly acquired salt among the stores. Useful, worth the yarn. You make a mental adjustment to what remains. Then you step outside for a moment and look across the farm. The sun has moved noticeably. Animals graze beyond the buildings. People work in the distance. Decisions about pasture, harvest, repairs, and supplies continue whether travellers are present or not. And soon another possibility enters your thoughts. The men of the household are not guaranteed to remain here. Some may leave for fishing, some for trade, some for assemblies, some for warfare or raiding. Some may be absent for months. When that happens, the farm does not politely stop operating until they return. Someone remains, someone makes decisions, and very often, that someone is a woman like you. before those journeys pull anyone away from the farm. However, another part of your world quietly accompanies almost everything you do. Belief. It does not wait politely for a special day. It lives in names, stories, objects, burial customs, seasonal gatherings, remembered ancestors, strange dreams, unlucky moments, fortunate harvests, and the small uncertainties people carry when they cannot control what happens next. You step back inside and place the salt securely among the stores. Perhaps something hangs nearby. A small pendant, an amulet, a carved object whose meaning would be obvious to you and frustratingly uncertain to an archaeologist. That uncertainty matters. The spiritual world of Scandinavia in the year 850 is not preserved as a tidy handbook. Most detailed written accounts of Norse mythology are recorded centuries later, particularly in medieval Iceland after Christianity has become established. Those texts are invaluable. They are also late. You do not possess a copy of the Poetic Edda beside your bed. Your beliefs are lived rather than organized into the neat mythology sections modern readers enjoy. You know stories about gods, Odin, Thor, Freya, other divine and supernatural beings whose importance can vary between communities. But exactly what an ordinary woman believes about each of them on an ordinary afternoon is difficult for future historians to recover. Religion is local, personal, seasonal, social, and probably inconsistent in the way human belief often is. One person worries deeply about an omen that another dismisses. One household emphasizes a particular divine power. Another may maintain traditions connected with ancestors or local beings. Sacred landscapes can include groves, springs, stones, burial mounds, and other places where memory and supernatural meaning overlap. You do not divide the universe cleanly into natural and supernatural categories. A storm is weather. It can also carry meaning. A successful birth is physical. It can also inspire gratitude toward powers beyond human control. The boundary is porous. You look toward the doorway as wind passes outside. Perhaps someone has mentioned an unusual dream. Dreams matter in later Norse literature, often as warnings or glimpses of future trouble. We cannot assume every dream in your century is treated as prophecy. But the broader idea that dreams can carry significance appears across many ancient societies. You listen, then perhaps smile. Not every strange dream requires summoning the gods. Sometimes you simply ate too much before sleeping. Still, uncertainty has power. The Viking Age is full of forces you cannot command. Weather, disease, childbirth, crop failure, sea travel, accidents, violence. You prepare carefully, but preparation has limits. Ritual offers another way of responding. Archaeology reveals evidence of offerings, ritual deposits, unusual structures, cult sites, burials, and feasting. Written sources later describe sacrifices known as blot. Though reconstructing their exact 9th century forms across all of Scandinavia is difficult, some rituals may occur at major communal gatherings. Others belong to households. Food and drink can carry sacred significance. Animals may be sacrificed in some contexts. Objects can be deposited deliberately. Ancestors may remain socially important after death. You probably do not experience religion only through grand ceremonies led by powerful men. Household practice matters too, and women appear within the surviving evidence for ritual roles. This leads into one of the most intriguing and debated subjects associated with Viking Age women, Saida. Later Old Norse sources describe Saida as a form of magic or ritual practice associated with prophecy. Altered states, influencing events, and other supernatural abilities, is particularly linked with women, although Odin himself is said to practice it despite later texts presenting aspects of the practice as socially problematic for men. Women described as volur, often translated as seeresses, appear in literary sources. One famous account describes a seeress wearing distinctive clothing and carrying a staff while performing prophecy. It is wonderfully vivid. It is also written centuries after your afternoon. Archaeologists have therefore asked whether certain unusual female burials containing staffs, special objects, intoxicating plants, or distinctive grave arrangements might belong to ritual specialists. Some interpretations are persuasive, others remain disputed. A metal rod might be a ritual staff. It might have another function. An unusual burial can suggest exceptional identity without telling us exactly what that identity was. You should resist turning every Viking woman into a sorceress. Most women are busy enough without adding professional prophecy to the schedule. Still, some women may indeed hold specialized ritual roles. If such a woman visits your community, she might inspire respect, curiosity, fear, or all three. Perhaps you have heard of one, perhaps you have seen one perform, or perhaps such figures are rare enough that most of your knowledge comes through stories. Your own religious life may be quieter. You might wear an amulet. Thor's hammer pendants become well known in Viking Age contexts, particularly during periods when Christianity is also spreading through Scandinavian networks. Their meanings may include devotion, protection, identity, or responses to Christian symbols, depending on context. Women wear some of them. Other pendants depict animals, miniature objects, or forms whose meanings remain uncertain. Objects can protect, or remind, or display belonging. You touch one absent-mindedly. Perhaps it came from a relative. That alone gives it power of another kind. Memory. Your dead remain part of the landscape. Burial mounds may stand near settlements or along routes. Older graves can be visible for generations. Some Viking Age communities deliberately interact with ancient monuments, sometimes burying their own dead near much older sites. The past is physically present. You may know which mound belongs to a grandparent. Another may be so old that nobody remembers who lies there. Stories fill the gap. The dead can establish claims to land and identity. We have always been here. Our ancestors are beneath this soil. That statement is political as well as spiritual. You think of family members who have died. Death itself is treated in many ways across Viking Age Scandinavia. Some people are cremated, others are buried intact. Graves can contain objects, animals, food, weapons, jewelry, tools, vehicles, boats, or almost nothing. Variation is enormous. Regional traditions differ. Status matters. Belief changes. This diversity warns against imagining one standardized Viking funeral. A wealthy woman might receive an elaborate burial with jewelry, household objects, animals, and perhaps a wagon or boat in exceptional cases. A poorer woman may leave a far quieter archaeological signature. Neither tells us exactly what she believed happened after death. Later, Norse literature describes realms associated with Odin, Freya, Helluland, and other supernatural destinations. Modern popular culture tends to send every dead Viking warrior directly to Valhalla. Usually while dramatic music plays, the historical picture is much messier. Not everyone expects the same afterlife. Not everyone is a warrior, and religion changes over time. That change is already becoming increasingly relevant in your century. Christianity is not unknown to Scandinavians in the year 850. Far from it. Scandinavian travellers encounter Christian communities constantly through trade, settlement, raiding, diplomacy, and service abroad. Missionaries have already entered parts of Denmark and Sweden, Ansgar. A Frankish missionary later remembered as the Apostle of the North, travelled to the trading settlement of Birka earlier in the 9th century and established a Christian presence there. How deep that conversion reaches is another question. A few people accepting Christianity does not instantly transform an entire society. Old and new beliefs can overlap for generations. A merchant may understand the Christian cross as well as Thor's hammer. A household may encounter Christian captives or travellers. Some Scandinavians may convert abroad for political, economic, or sincere religious reasons. Others remain attached to older traditions. You could therefore hear about Christ without considering yourself Christian. Perhaps someone who has travelled west tells you that Christians worship one God and reject the old gods. Strange, interesting, potentially inconvenient if they refuse to join certain rituals. You continue with your work. Belief rarely stops the chores. That may be the most historically honest detail of all. You can wonder about gods while stirring food, remember ancestors while spinning, wear an amulet while milking a cow, fear an omen and still repair a fence. Sacred and ordinary life overlap because neither has been separated into its own compartment. The light changes outside. Clouds pass over the farm. For a moment the interior darkens. Someone notices. Nobody panics. The cloud moves on. You return to what needs doing. And somewhere beyond the horizon, ships are moving across grey water. Some carry merchants. Some carry raiders. Some carry missionaries. Some carry men who belong to farms like yours. When they disappear from view, gods may be asked to protect them. But prayers cannot milk cows, preserve grain, negotiate with neighbours, or decide what to do when weather turns against the fields. If the men leave, belief remains, so does the work, and the household must continue under the hands of whoever stays behind. A ship disappearing beyond the horizon does not take the farm's responsibilities with it. The cattle remain impressively indifferent to maritime adventure. The grain continues requiring protection. Children still become hungry. Roofs still leak. Fences still fail. And the weather, showing its usual lack of respect for human scheduling, continues changing whenever it pleases. If your husband or other adult men of the household are away, the shape of your work changes. Their absence does not automatically mean they are raiding. That distinction is important. Popular imagination tends to place every Scandinavian man aboard a longship with an axe before breakfast. In reality, maritime travel serves many purposes. Men may leave to fish, trade, visit relatives, attend assemblies, perform military service, participate in raiding expeditions, manage distant property, or seek employment elsewhere. Some journeys last days, others weeks, some stretch across seasons, and some travellers never return. You do not know which kind of departure it will be when a ship leaves. That uncertainty becomes part of household life. Imagine that several men from your farmstead have gone away for trade. Before departure, you help prepare them. Clothing matters, food matters, bedding may matter, tools need checking, perhaps gifts or trade goods must be assembled. A voyage that appears adventurous from the shore begins with an astonishing amount of packing. Someone has to think about what people will eat after the coastline disappears. Dried fish, bread, grain products, butter or cheese, water or drink, preserved meat where available. The exact provisions depend upon route, season, vessel, and purpose. But no crew survives on courage. You know this because you helped create much of what they carry. Then they leave. The farm grows quieter. Not peaceful, quieter. Those are different things. Fewer adults mean fewer hands. Tasks normally divided between people must be redistributed. Older children may receive greater responsibility. Servants, relatives, or enslaved workers may take on additional labour. You may supervise work usually associated more strongly with men. Agricultural labour cannot wait for gender categories when rain is approaching and hay lies exposed. If something needs moving, you arrange it. If an animal needs attention, someone handles it. If a building requires repair, you decide whether the household can fix it immediately or needs help from neighbours. This flexibility is one reason historians are cautious about presenting Viking Age labour as a perfectly divided chart. There are gendered patterns, there are expectations, but households are practical organisms. Necessity rearranges them. You step outside and scan the fields. Perhaps haymaking is underway. Hay is one of the least dramatic materials in Viking history and one of the most important. Livestock surviving winter depends heavily upon fodder. Animals that cannot graze beneath snow still need to eat. Grass must therefore be cut, dried, gathered, and stored while conditions allow. Rain at the wrong time can damage it. So weather becomes urgent. You look at the sky. Clouds gathering. Not ideal. People need to move faster. You call to an older child. Another worker is already gathering cut grass. You join them. Your hands are accustomed to labour. But fieldwork uses your body differently from spinning or cooking. You bend, lift, carry, straighten. Again. The The sun may warm your back despite the cool air. Bits of dry vegetation cling to your clothing. You're not standing elegantly at the doorway waiting for your Viking husband to return. You're making sure his livestock is still alive when he does. That is a rather more consequential activity. Management can extend beyond immediate chores. Suppose a boundary dispute arises while your husband is away. You cannot simply freeze the problem until he returns months later. You speak with neighbours. Relatives may represent the household in formal matters. Kinship networks provide support. Exactly what legal actions you can personally undertake depends upon local custom and status, much of which is imperfectly known for your century. Later, Scandinavian law codes offer examples of women's legal capacities and limitations, but they must be used carefully. What seems likely is that an adult free woman, particularly a household mistress or widow, can exercise considerable practical authority even within a male-dominated legal framework. The archaeological record sometimes gives us striking glimpses of women associated with movement and property. Women participate in Scandinavian migration. They settle in the British Isles, Iceland, and later across the North Atlantic. Isotopic analysis of human remains can reveal that some women buried in one place grew up somewhere else. Mobility is not exclusively male. The old story in which Viking men travel everywhere while women remain permanently rooted to one farm is too simple. Some women travel with families. Some may travel for marriage. Some move during colonization. Some possibly participate in trade. And a small number of female graves containing weapons have generated intense debate over whether certain women may have occupied warrior roles. One particularly famous grave at Birka was long assumed to contain a male warrior because of its weapons and military equipment. Osteological and genetic analysis later identified the buried individual as biologically female. The interpretation remains debated. Was she actually a warrior, a commander, a woman buried with symbols of status rather than her daily equipment? The grave cannot answer every question, but it does warn against allowing 19th century assumptions to decide identity before evidence is examined. For your own life, exceptional warrior burials change very little. Most Viking Age women are not warriors. Most Viking Age men are not professional warriors either. Your battlefield is currently a threatening rain cloud. You continue gathering hay. A few drops would not destroy everything. A prolonged soaking could become troublesome. Everyone works faster. The older child complains. You ignore this ancient ritual of childhood. More hay is moved. Eventually the cloud passes without releasing much rain. Relief. Nobody celebrates. You simply slow down. Another problem avoided. This is how competence often feels. Not triumph. Relief. You return toward the buildings. Perhaps there is a repair to arrange. A wooden gate has loosened. You could wait for a returning man to fix it. The goat would be delighted with that decision. You find someone capable of helping. Maybe you repair it yourself if the work is within your skill. The farm does not care who receives credit. It cares whether the gate closes. Later, you inspect livestock again. A cow looks healthy. A sheep has wandered farther than you prefer. Children bring it back. Someone reports that a container has cracked. Another small decision. Can it be repaired? Probably. Almost everything receives that question before a replacement is considered. You think briefly about the absent travellers. Where are they now, if they are crossing the North Sea? Conditions can change quickly. Viking ships are impressive vessels, but impressive does not mean safe. Crews face storms, cold, navigation challenges, accidents, conflict, and disease. News travels slowly. There is no message saying they arrived safely. You wait. Days, weeks, perhaps months. A returning traveller may suddenly appear with information. Until then, uncertainty sits quietly beside your daily work. This may be emotionally difficult, but you cannot spend every hour staring toward the water. The farm demands attention. That demand can almost be merciful. There is always something immediate. Milk this animal. Turn that food. Repair this seam. Move that hay. Comfort this child. Tomorrow can worry about itself for a few minutes. Your household's dependence on your work becomes especially visible during absence. The voyage and farm are two halves of one economy. Travellers may bring home silver, trade goods, slaves, luxury objects, tools, or information, but they can leave only because other people maintain the productive base behind them. You keep animals alive, protect crops, preserve stores, produce textiles, raise children, manage labour, maintain relationships. The ship's journey looks like movement. Your work looks stationary. Both create survival. Late in the day, perhaps a figure appears on the path. For a moment your heart responds before your mind does, but it is only someone from a neighbouring farm. No news, not today. You accept that. Waiting is another skill nobody includes on lists of Viking technologies. You have become good at it. The sun has begun lowering now. Its light stretches across the buildings and fields, changing the colours of timber and grass. Outdoor work cannot continue forever. Animals need gathering. Tools need putting away. The evening meal waits. So does the hearth. You call the children closer. People begin moving back toward the longhouse. The farm slowly contracts from fields and paths toward one central point of warmth. And after a day spent feeding, making, teaching, managing, trading, believing, repairing, and waiting, you finally approach the hours that might almost resemble rest. Almost. The animals come in before you do, or at least most of them do. One sheep appears determined to negotiate the matter. An older child circles behind it while you stand near the enclosure, guiding the small group towards shelter and checking them as they pass. Evening livestock work repeats many of the concerns of morning. Count them. Look for injuries. Make certain the young animals are present. Check water. Check barriers. Listen. You know their ordinary behaviour well enough that something unusual can catch your attention quickly. The reluctant sheep finally joins the others. A small domestic victory. You secure the enclosure. Depending on season and local practice, livestock may spend nights outdoors, within separate buildings, or sheltered in sections associated with the main farm buildings. Winter arrangements are particularly important because animals need protection and stored fodder. You distribute what is necessary. The smell of hay rises as you move it. Dry grass, dust, animals, evening air. You can feel the day's work in your shoulders now. Your body has been moving since before sunrise. Fire tending, cooking, livestock, grain, textiles, children, stores, visitors, field work. None of these alone sounds impossible. Together they fill the day. That is perhaps the most important truth about your routine. You are rarely performing one spectacularly difficult task. You are performing ordinary tasks without stopping. You return tools to their places. A lost tool means wasted time tomorrow. An iron tool represents significant value. So leaving one outside in damp weather would be careless. Wooden equipment matters too. Handles split, edges wear. Everything receives attention because everything took labour to make. The children are called toward the house. One claims not to be tired. This is obviously false. You can tell because the child has reached that peculiar stage of exhaustion in which every unnecessary object becomes fascinating. Inside, the fire has changed character. Daylight still enters, but the hearth is becoming important again. The longhouse seems to draw inward around it. Smoke rises, shadows deepen near the walls. The warmth feels good after the outdoor air. You begin preparing the evening meal. Perhaps a pot has already been heating. In a larger household, another woman may have started cooking while you finished outside. Food goes into the vessel according to what is available. Grain, vegetables or gathered plants, perhaps peas, maybe pieces of meat or fish. A stew or porridge-like preparation makes efficient use of ingredients and heat. You stir. The smell gradually fills the room. Someone cuts bread. Another person brings a dairy product. If your household is prosperous and this is an ordinary evening, the meal can be satisfying without resembling a feast. Feasts are different. Those involve greater quantities of meat, ale, perhaps imported or prestigious foods, formal hospitality, and social display. Tonight you need nourishment, not theatre. You taste the food. More salt. You think of the small trade earlier. A little, not too much. The newly acquired salt already feels like part of the household economy. You add it. The meal continues cooking. People settle closer to the hearth as work becomes less mobile. This is when the house changes from workshop and farm headquarters into something more obviously social. Not completely. Your spindle may return to your hand naturally. Remember the wool waiting earlier. It has not developed the ability to spin itself during your absence. You sit and begin drawing fibre. Turn, draw, wind. The motion feels different now because you are tired. Your hands know the rhythm well enough to continue while conversation moves around you. Someone talks about the visitors. Someone repeats the news from the coast. A child asks a question. An older person corrects a detail in a story. This is your evening entertainment. No screen glows. No recorded music plays. People provide the content. Stories can be practical. News, family memories, local events. They can also become larger. Tales of gods, ancestors, heroes, voyages, feuds, strange creatures, distant lands. The exact oral stories circulating in your household cannot be reconstructed with certainty. Later Old Norse literature preserves material that probably contains older traditions, but centuries of retelling and literary compositions stand between those manuscripts and your fire. Still, storytelling itself is ancient. You listen. Perhaps someone mentions Thor. A child knows the familiar parts already. That is how oral tradition works. Repetition is not failure. It is preservation. The same story can be heard many times, each telling slightly different. A storyteller emphasizes one scene tonight. Another person tells it differently next winter. Names remain. Images remain. Eventually, centuries later, some stories are written down. Others disappear. You have no idea which will survive. The meal is ready. Spindles pause. People gather. Who sits where can reflect status and household organization. Important guests may receive honored positions during formal occasions. Tonight seating is practical. Food is distributed. Perhaps you serve others. Perhaps another household member does. The senior woman can hold considerable responsibility for hospitality and provisioning. But again, wealth determines how much of the physical serving she performs herself. You eat. Warm food settles pleasantly after the day's labor. Conversation becomes slower. The children concentrate on bowls. For a rare moment, nobody asks you where anything is. Enjoy it. It will not last. You look around the firelit interior. Faces appear brighter on the side nearest the flames and fade into shadow on the other. Smoke softens the upper space. Wooden posts divide the darkness. Textiles hang nearby. Objects catch occasional light. This is the Viking Age as most people living within it actually experience it. Not from the bow of a ship, not in a shield wall. Here, beside a cooking fire. A woman across from you has been spinning too. An older man repairs a small object. Someone checks a knife edge. A child begins falling asleep while insisting very seriously that this is not happening. Work and rest overlap. After eating, vessels still require attention. Of course they do. You scrape what remains. Useful leftovers are preserved if possible. Scraps may be assigned elsewhere. Bowls are cleaned enough for future use. The cooking area is put into order. Tomorrow's morning should not begin by discovering tonight's laziness. You inspect the stores once more. A habit. Everything appears secure. Then perhaps a drink is shared. Ale can accompany evening social life. Though strength and quantity vary. Mead exists too, made with honey. But honey makes it comparatively costly. The endless drinking halls of popular Viking imagery exaggerate ordinary consumption. Most evenings cannot be permanent festivals. A farm attempting that lifestyle would run out of grain with impressive speed. You settle again. The story resumes. This one concerns a journey. A traveller crossing rough water. A foreign shore. Perhaps the tale reminds you of someone absent. Your spindle slows for a moment, then turns again. Waiting. Always waiting. You cannot control the sea from here, so you work. A child asks whether the traveller in the story returns. The storyteller pauses deliberately. Naturally, even in the 9th century, people understand suspense. Yes, this one returns. The child seems satisfied. You are too, although you do not say so. Outside, darkness gathers across the fields, without artificial street lighting. Night becomes genuinely dark. Clouds can erase even the stars. On clear nights, the sky may seem enormous. Inside, flame defines your world. The hearth is smaller now. You no longer need full cooking heat. Fuel must last. You reduce the fire gradually while preserving enough warmth and, ideally, embers for morning. Remember how the day began. A tiny orange glow beneath ash. You are preparing tomorrow's now. Before sleep, there are final checks. The door, the fire, children, animals if necessary, valuable objects. A small mistake at night can become a large problem before dawn. You make your rounds. Everything seems settled. The spindle is finally put away. Your hands are allowed to become empty. That may be the clearest sign that evening has truly arrived. Voices soften. One child is already asleep. Another lies beneath wool and listens to the final conversation without contributing. The room grows quieter. You adjust the hearth. Embers glow red beneath grey ash, exactly as they did this morning. Soon you will lie down. But first, in these last minutes of wakefulness, the full weight of the day becomes visible, not as a list, as tired muscles, smoke in your hair, flour once stuck beneath your fingernails, the smell of wool on your clothing, the knowledge that everyone has eaten. The stores are closed. The animals are secure. The children are warm. The household has survived another ordinary day. And in your world, ordinary survival is never a small achievement. You lower yourself toward your sleeping place while the last conversation fades around you. The longhouse has become almost unrecognizable compared with the busy space of midday. The loom is only a dark outline now. Wooden vessels disappear into shadow. The objects that demanded your attention all day have finally stopped asking anything of you. For the moment, you pull wool closer around yourself. The warmth is imperfect but welcome. Bedding varies enormously according to household wealth and local materials. Some people have access to more comfortable mattresses, skins, blankets, and perhaps feathers. Others sleep more simply on benches or prepared sleeping spaces with whatever insulation the household can provide. You settle your body carefully. Your shoulders remember the quern. Your fingers remember the spindle. Your back remembers the field. The day's labour remains written across muscles that future archaeologists can sometimes study but never fully experience. Nearby, someone shifts. A child murmurs. The fire answers with a faint crackle. You look toward the hearth. The flames have mostly disappeared, leaving embers glowing beneath ash. You have deliberately preserved them so tomorrow's fire can begin more easily. The circle is almost closed. This morning you woke beside dying embers. Tonight you leave another set waiting. Between those two moments lies nearly everything required to keep a household alive. That's the part of Viking history most easily lost. A ship survives in a burial and becomes famous. A sword enters a museum and receives its own glass case. Silver catches the eye. Runestones preserve names. Your bowl may rot. Your wooden spoon may vanish completely. Your bread is eaten. Your yarn becomes cloth, then clothing, then patches, then scraps, then eventually nothing recognizable at all. The evidence of ordinary life disappears precisely because ordinary objects are used so thoroughly. Yet those objects occupy most of your day. You think back to morning, the cow demanding attention, the grain waiting beside the quern, the wool between your fingers, the child watching you work. None seems historically dramatic. Together they reveal the machinery beneath the Viking Age. Without farms like yours, maritime expansion cannot continue. Ships require timber and iron, certainly, but crews require food. They require clothing. They require sails. They require places to return to. The wealth brought from distant lands has meaning because functioning households can absorb, store, exchange, and display it. You are part of that system, not standing outside history, inside it. The word Viking itself may never describe you in the way modern people casually use it. In your own world, identities are tied to family, place, status, community, and relationships. The modern habit of calling every Scandinavian person from this period a Viking would flatten those distinctions. You are a woman living in Scandinavia around the year 850, perhaps Danish, perhaps Norwegian, perhaps Swedish. Though those modern national identities are not yet operating exactly as they will centuries later, your local identity matters more. Your farm matters. Your kin matter. Your reputation matters. Your legal status matters enormously. If you are free, you possess rights and responsibilities denied to an enslaved woman sleeping perhaps only a short distance away. That uncomfortable contrast remains even here at bedtime. There is no single Viking Woman's Day. A wealthy widow managing a substantial estate experiences different pressures from a young wife on a modest farm. A woman living at a trading centre encounters different rhythms from one on an isolated farmstead. A craft specialist works differently from a farm labourer. An enslaved woman experiences coercion behind many tasks that a free household mistress may organise herself. A woman living near Birka does not experience precisely the same environment as one beside a Western Norwegian fjord. History becomes more accurate when you allow these differences to remain. You do not need one perfect representative woman. You need thousands of individual lives overlapping. Archaeology gives fragments of them. A spindle whorl, a brooch, a comb, a key, a loom weight, a grave, a fragment of cloth, a burned piece of bread. Each seems tiny. Together they begin reconstructing a world. You close your eyes. Perhaps tomorrow will resemble today. That is likely. The animals will need care again. Fire will need reviving. Food will need preparing. Textiles will still be unfinished. Children will still require teaching. There may be no visitors tomorrow, or perhaps there will be more. Perhaps news will arrive from the coast. Perhaps someone absent will return. You cannot know. Season changes the routine more dramatically. At harvest, everyone works under pressure. Winter pushes activity inward. Spring brings newborn livestock and renewed field work. Summer stretches daylight late into the evening. Your daily schedule breathes with the agricultural year. There is no permanent timetable. Nature keeps rearranging it, and occasionally larger events intrude. A failed harvest, disease, a marriage, a birth, a death, conflict, migration, a voyage. These events change households suddenly, but most human existence takes place between them. That is where you live tonight, between dramatic events, doing ordinary things extraordinarily often. Your contribution is easy to underestimate because domestic work rarely produces individual fame, yet spinning alone can consume countless hours. Textile production supports clothing, exchange, and maritime technology. Food preservation turns seasonal abundance into winter survival. Livestock care preserves household wealth. Child raising transfers practical and cultural knowledge. Managing stores protects the farm from careless consumption. Hospitality maintains relationships. When people leave, your responsibility can expand. The work does not make you equal to men under every law or custom. It does not make Viking society secretly modern. You live inside a hierarchical world where gender, wealth, freedom, kinship, and status constrain possibility. But neither are you merely waiting in the background while men create history elsewhere. The background is where history is being supplied. The thought might make you smile if someone explained it that way. You would probably ask them to help grind tomorrow's grain. That would end the philosophical discussion quickly. The fire settles. A small piece of charcoal collapses inward. Tiny sparks rise and vanish. You breathe more slowly. Smoke remains in the rafters. Wool holds warmth around your body. Outside, animals shift occasionally in the darkness. Perhaps a dog still listens for movement beyond the buildings. Beyond the farm lies a much larger world. Roads lead toward neighbouring settlements. Waterways lead toward trading places. Seas connect your household to Britain, Ireland, Francia, the Baltic, and distant eastern routes. Ships move through that darkness somewhere. But none of that needs your attention now. For several hours, your work is finished. Tomorrow the ember will be uncovered. Dry tinder will begin smoking. The cow will complain. Someone will want breakfast. A child will misplace something important. The spindle will turn again, and the loom. with admirable patience, will still be waiting. Tonight, however, you have done enough. The household is fed, the stores are protected, the animals are settled, the children are close. You allow your breathing to follow the quiet rhythm of the room. Slowly in, slowly out. The year is 850, but the feeling beside you is much older and much more familiar. A long day has ended. Another will come, but not yet. The darkness can keep tomorrow for a while, and now, as the last red glow settles beneath the ash, you can let the farm become softer around you. The fields beyond the walls disappear beneath the night. The paths become pale suggestions beneath the stars, and the distant water lies dark and still. Nothing more needs to be woven tonight. Nothing more needs to be ground, carried, counted, repaired, or preserved. The sheep are quiet. The children are warm. The little fire breathes beneath its covering of ash, keeping one small spark safe for morning. Your hands, so busy since before sunrise, finally rest without holding anything at all. You listen once more to the timber settling, to the wind touching the roof, to the gentle breathing of the household around you. Tomorrow will bring its familiar work, but tomorrow is still far away, for now there is only wool, warmth, darkness, and rest. So let your thoughts grow quiet, let the old farm fade gently into the night, and sleep well, my friend.